In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of disturbing Rick and Morty theories you can fall asleep to. Let's get into it. Starting it off with Evil Morty's real endgame, escaping the central finite curve. Evil Morty's real endgame theory. Evil Morty had one goal that he never told anyone about until the very end. He wanted to escape. Not just escape from a bad situation or a dangerous place. He wanted to escape from the entire section of reality where Rick exists as the smartest person in the universe. This goal seems impossible to most people, but Evil Morty spent years planning exactly how to make it happen. He first appeared way back in Season 1 when everyone thought he was just a sidekick to an evil version of Rick. That Rick had a scar on his face and was going around killing other Ricks from different dimensions. He murdered 27 Ricks and kidnapped hundreds of Mortys to torture them. The whole thing looked like the work of a psychotic Rick on a rampage. But when Rick C-137 and his Morty tracked down this evil Rick to stop him, they discovered something shocking. The evil Rick was not in control at all. He was just a mindless robot being controlled remotely by his Morty through an eye patch. That Morty, who everyone started calling Evil Morty, was the real mastermind behind everything. When Evil Morty got caught, he did something very smart. He took off his eye patch, which was the remote control device, and stomped on it. Then he just blended into the crowd of rescued Mortys who were being taken to the Citadel. Nobody knew that one of the most dangerous Mortys in the multiverse was hiding among them. The Citadel is a giant space station city where thousands of Ricks and Mortys from different dimensions live together. It exists in its own pocket dimension that any Rick can reach if they know the coordinates. For years after his first appearance, Evil Morty stayed hidden and planned his next move. He studied how the Citadel worked. He learned about its power structure and its politics. He figured out that the Citadel was not just a city, it was part of something much bigger and much worse. The Citadel sits inside something called the central finite curve. This is the most important thing to understand about Evil Morty's plan. The central finite curve is not a physical place you can point to on a map. It is a barrier that separates certain parts of the multiverse from other parts. Think of infinity like an ocean with no end. Now imagine someone building a wall in that ocean that curves around and connects back to itself. That wall divides the infinite ocean into two sections, one section inside the wall and everything else outside the wall. That is what the central finite curve is. It is a wall around infinity. The Ricks built this wall a long time ago, and they built it for a very specific reason. They wanted to separate all the universes where Rick is the smartest being from all the universes where he is not the smartest. Inside the central finite curve, Rick is always the top genius. Outside the central finite curve, there might be universes where someone smarter than Rick exists, or universes where Rick does not exist at all. This reveals something dark about the Ricks. They did not want to explore the full, infinite multiverse. They wanted to play God in their own little section of it where they would always be on top. They wanted to be the biggest fish in a smaller pond. By creating the central finite curve, the Ricks trapped themselves in universes where they would always be the dominant genius and where Mortys would always be around to serve them. This is important because Ricks use Mortys as camouflage. A Morty's brainwaves are the opposite of Rick's brainwaves. When a Rick and Morty are together, their brainwaves cancel each other out, making it impossible for other Ricks to track them down. This is why every Rick needs a Morty. Not because they love them or care about them, but because they are useful tools. When Evil Morty learned about the central finite curve, everything made sense to him. He realized he was living in a cosmic prison, designed by Ricks to keep themselves in power forever. Every Morty inside the curve exists to serve Ricks. They are bred for that purpose. The Citadel Ricks even go so far as to force Beths and Jerrys in different dimensions to fall in love, so they will create Mortys. When they do not have enough natural Mortys, they start making clones. These Mortys get shipped across the multiverse to Ricks who need sidekicks. When a Morty dies, they make a new clone, give it the old Morty's memories, and send it to replace the dead one. The Rick who owns that Morty never even knows the difference. It is a factory system for creating servants, and it happens on a massive scale. Evil Morty saw all of this and realized the system would never change from the inside. The Ricks built it too well. So he decided to break out of it completely. But escaping the central finite curve is not like escaping from a normal prison. The curve is not made of bars or walls you can climb over. It is built into the fabric of reality itself. Every portal gun that Ricks use is programmed to only open portals to dimensions inside the curve. You cannot just reprogram a normal portal gun to go outside because the technology does not work that way. The portal guns only have access to dimensions that have been mapped inside the curve. Going outside would require breaking through the barrier itself, which would take enormous power and very specific knowledge. Evil Morty knew he could not do this alone. He needed resources, and he needed information that only existed in one place. He needed the Citadel's dimensional drive, and he needed the complete knowledge of how it was built, and there was only one Rick who had that complete knowledge in his brain, Rick C-137. Rick C-137 is the Rick we follow in the show. He is also the Rick who helped build the Citadel in the first place. This is another huge revelation that came out in Season 5. Rick C-137 did not want to be a Rick who traveled dimensions at first. He was happy just living with his wife Diane and his daughter Beth in his home dimension. But then another Rick showed up in his garage and offered him portal technology. Rick C-137 said no, he did not want that life. The other Rick got angry and threw a bomb into Rick's house that killed both Diane and Beth right in front of him. This changed everything for Rick C-137. He finished building the portal gun by himself and spent years hunting across the multiverse trying to find the Rick who murdered his family. He killed many Ricks during this hunt, dozens of them, maybe even hundreds. He was so focused on revenge that he became an alcoholic to cope with the pain and depression. All those other Ricks that Rick C-137 was hunting and killing eventually banded together to protect themselves from him. They formed the Citadel as a way to survive. Eventually, Rick C-137 was so exhausted from his hunt and so broken by never finding the Rick who killed his family that he agreed to a truce. He helped the Ricks build the Citadel into what it became, even though he hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. After the Citadel was built, Rick C-137 left. He found a dimension where his daughter Beth was still alive and grown up. He moved in with her family and started going on adventures with his grandson Morty. That is the Rick we see in the show. But because he helped build the Citadel, he still had all the technical knowledge about how it works buried in his memories. Evil Morty knew this. Back in Season 1, when Evil Morty was using the evil robot Rick to hunt other Ricks, he actually captured Rick C-137 and started scanning his brain. He got about halfway through the scan before Rick C-137 escaped. Evil Morty kept that incomplete brain scan for years. He knew that someday he would need to finish it to get the rest of the information he needed. But he could not just kidnap Rick C-137 again. Rick is too smart and too dangerous for that. So Evil Morty came up with a longer plan. He went to the Citadel and entered politics. He pretended to be a normal Morty who wanted to make life better for other Mortys. He gave speeches about equality and justice. The Mortys at the Citadel loved him because he seemed to care about them. The Ricks underestimated him because they thought Mortys were too dumb to be a real threat. Evil Morty used this to get elected as president of the Citadel. Once he became president, Evil Morty had access to everything. He killed the Shadow Council of Ricks, who really ran things behind the scenes. He threw anyone who opposed him out of an airlock into space. He started building a machine underneath the Citadel in secret. This machine was the dimensional drive. It was designed to punch a hole through the central finite curve. Deformed Mortys worked in horrible conditions underground to build this drive, while Evil Morty acted like everything was normal above. He was playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to finish his brain scan of Rick C-137 and get the final piece of information he needed. That moment came in the Season 5 finale when Rick and Morty visited the Citadel. Morty needed special medicine to reverse some aging he did to himself, and they had to come to the Citadel to get it. Evil Morty invited them to dinner. During dinner, Evil Morty acted friendly and curious. He asked Rick about the central finite curve and how to bring it down. Rick refused to tell him anything. But that did not matter, because Evil Morty had a brain-scanning device hidden in the dining room. While they ate appetizers, the device scanned Rick's brain and combined it with the old partial scan from Season 1. Now Evil Morty had the complete picture. He had all of Rick's memories and all of Rick's knowledge about how the Citadel was built and how its systems worked. He had everything he needed to escape. Evil Morty then did something very clever with Morty. He showed Morty the truth about how the Citadel really works. He showed him that Mortys are bred like cattle. He showed him the factories where they clone Mortys and brainwash them. He He showed him how Beth's and Jerry's are manipulated to create more Mortys. He did this because he wanted Morty to see Rick for what he really was. Part of a system that treats Mortys as objects and not people. Rick and Morty tried to leave using their portal gun, but evil Morty had already hacked all the portal fluid in the entire Citadel. When Rick tested the portal by pushing a guard through it, the guard got shredded to pieces instantly. The portal led to the Blender Dimension, a place where everything gets torn apart. Evil Morty hacked every single portal gun in the Citadel to do this. Then he made an announcement over the loudspeakers telling everyone to stay inside and not leave. This was reverse psychology. Ricks hate being told what to do, so naturally, thousands of Ricks and Mortys immediately tried to leave using their portal guns. Every single one of them died horrible deaths because their portals all led to deadly dimensions. This was part of evil Morty's plan. He was not evil because he enjoyed killing. He was evil because he was willing to do anything to escape the system, and he knew that meant the Citadel had to be destroyed. While chaos spread across the Citadel, evil Morty activated the dimensional drive. This device needed massive amounts of power to work. To get that power, evil Morty hacked Operation Phoenix. This was a system the Ricks created as a backup plan for when they die. When a Rick dies, their consciousness transfers into a new clone body and they come back to life. But evil Morty rerouted all of those clone bodies to grinders. As Ricks and Mortys across the Citadel tried to use Operation Phoenix to escape the disaster, they woke up in new bodies, only to immediately get thrown into meat grinders. Their blood and body parts powered the dimensional drive. It is one of the most horrible things shown in the entire series. Morty watched it happen and was traumatized by how many people were dying. But evil Morty did not care. He told Morty that he was not there to fix the system or save the Mortys. He was just there to leave. He called it doing jack shit about the problem and leaving it behind. The dimensional drive created a massive wormhole that started tearing through the central finite curve. At the same time, portal fluid flooded the entire Citadel. The combination of the drive and the portal fluid created enough energy to punch a hole through the barrier that separated the curve from the rest of the multiverse. The Citadel started ripping itself apart. Rick and Morty ran to the lower levels looking for untainted portal fluid, but evil Morty had already drained it all. They met evil Morty at the dimensional drive. He explained the whole truth to them there. He told Morty that the central finite curve was a wall around infinity built by Ricks to keep themselves in power. He told Morty that Rick only came back to him because the crows he had been adventuring with dumped him. He told Morty that all Ricks use their trauma as an excuse to justify anything they do. Then he offered Morty a chance to leave with him. Rick actually told Morty it was a better deal than staying. But Morty chose to stay with Rick anyway. Evil Morty expected this. He knew Mortys are bred for forgiveness. They always forgive Rick, no matter what he does. Evil Morty got into a small spaceship and flew toward the wormhole as the Citadel exploded around him. Rick and Morty barely escaped by detaching Mortyberg, which is a section of the Citadel where Mortys live, and breaking free before the whole station got destroyed. They ended up floating in space, stranded, without portal travel. Meanwhile, evil Morty flew through the wormhole into a kaleidoscope of colors and realities. He punched through layer after layer of dimensional barriers until he was on the other side of the central finite curve. When he got there, he pulled out his own portal gun. This portal gun was special. Unlike Rick's green portals, evil Morty's portals glowed golden yellow. The golden portal gun is designed to travel to dimensions outside the central finite curve, dimensions that Rick's portal technology cannot reach. Dimensions that were never mapped because Ricks never wanted to go there. Evil Morty opened a yellow portal and disappeared into it. His plan worked completely. He escaped from the central finite curve. He destroyed the Citadel and killed almost all the Ricks and most of the Mortys who lived there. He broke Rick's entire system and left Rick and Morty stranded without portal technology. The green portal fluid that powers normal portal guns was all destroyed in the disaster. Rick later confirmed, in Season 6, that portal guns would not work anymore because evil Morty used up all the available portal fluid to break through the curve. Rick had to reset portal technology entirely, which sent everyone back to their original dimensions and made portal travel much harder. Evil Morty succeeded in every part of his plan. He is now somewhere outside the central finite curve, living in a universe where Rick might not be the smartest being, or where Rick might not exist at all. He is finally free from the system that Rick's built. He is free from the cosmic prison that trapped every Morty inside the curve. The whole story reveals that evil Morty is not really evil in the traditional sense. He is not killing people because he enjoys it. He is not trying to rule the world or gain power. He just wants to live free from Rick's influence. The reason people call him evil is because he is willing to kill thousands of innocent people to achieve that freedom. He sees the lives of Citadel Ricks and Mortys as acceptable losses in his war against the system. He does not feel bad about what he did because he believes the system itself is so corrupt and so horrible that destroying it justifies any cost. This makes him a very complex villain. Some fans even debate whether he is really a villain at all, or if he is more of an anti-hero who did terrible things for understandable reasons. Either way, evil Morty achieved something no other Morty ever did. He outsmarted Rick, he beat the system, and he escaped to a part of reality that Ricks can never reach with their technology. That makes him one of the most dangerous and successful characters in the entire show. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the theory that our Morty is not Rick C-137's original Morty. Our Morty is not Rick C-137's original Morty. One of the biggest revelations in Rick and Morty happens slowly across multiple seasons before finally getting confirmed in Season 6. The Morty we watch throughout the entire series is not Rick C-137's original grandson. In fact, Rick C-137 never had a Morty at all. His daughter Beth died when she was still a child. This means our Morty comes from a completely different dimension than the Rick we follow. They are not biologically related in the traditional sense. Rick moved into a dimension where another Rick had abandoned his family, and that abandoned family included the Morty we see in every episode. This is not a theory or speculation. The show confirms this as absolute canon through multiple episodes that carefully reveal how the family we watch is actually a patchwork of people from different dimensions who ended up together through various accidents and choices. The story starts with understanding where everyone originally came from. Rick C-137 is from Dimension C-137. This is his home dimension where he was born and grew up. In that dimension, he married a woman named Diane, and they had a daughter named Beth. Rick was a simple scientist trying to figure out basic teleportation technology. He was happy with his family and wanted nothing more than to spend time with them. But then another Rick showed up in his garage one day. This Rick was from a different dimension, and he had already figured out how to travel between dimensions using portal technology. He offered Rick C-137 the secret to interdimensional travel. He wanted Rick C-137 to become like him and abandon his family to explore the infinite multiverse. Rick C-137 refused. He told the other Rick that kind of life sounded lonely and he would rather stay with his wife and daughter. He said he wanted to be a different kind of Rick. The other Rick did not take this rejection well. He got angry that Rick C-137 thought he was better than him just because he chose family over science. So this other Rick did something horrible. He sent a bomb through a portal into Rick C-137's house. The bomb killed both Diane and Beth right in front of Rick C-137. This other Rick who murdered Rick's family is called Rick Prime. He is the actual villain of the entire show, and the reason Rick C-137 became the broken alcoholic genius we see in the series. After his family died, Rick C-137 eventually finished inventing the portal gun on his own. Then he spent years traveling the multiverse, hunting for Rick Prime. He wanted revenge. During this hunt, Rick C-137 killed hundreds of other Ricks, hoping one of them would be Rick Prime or would have information about where to find him. He never found Rick Prime. The hunt went on for so long that Rick became depressed and started drinking heavily to cope with the pain. All the other Ricks that Rick C-137 was hunting eventually banded together to protect themselves from him. They formed what would become the Citadel of Ricks. Eventually, Rick C-137 was so tired and broken that he agreed to a truce with them. He even helped them build the Citadel into what it became. But then Rick C-137 left the Citadel behind because he hated being around other Ricks. He wanted to find a family again. He wanted something to fill the void left by Diane and Beth. So Rick C-137 traveled the multiverse, looking for a dimension where he could settle down. He found one. It was a dimension where Rick Prime had invented portal technology and then abandoned his family to explore the multiverse. Rick Prime left behind his adult daughter Beth, who had grown up without a father. This Beth eventually married Jerry, and they had 2 children named Summer and Morty. Rick C, 137, moved into that dimension and took Rick Prime's place in the family. He pretended to be their Rick, even though he was not actually related to any of them by blood. This is the crucial point. The dimension Rick C, 137 moved into is called the Prime Dimension. It is the dimension where Rick Prime originally came from. This means that Morty Prime is actually Rick Prime's biological grandson, not Rick C, 137's grandson. Rick C, 137 chose this specific dimension on purpose. He knew it was Rick Prime's home dimension. His plan was to wait there, hoping that someday Rick Prime would come back home and Rick C, 137 could finally get his revenge. So Rick C, 137 has been using Morty Prime as bait this entire time. Morty is Rick Prime's real grandson, and Rick C, 137 moved in with Rick Prime's family, specifically to try to catch Rick Prime when he returned. This is dark, but it explains a lot about their relationship. Rick C, 137 cares about Morty, but Morty was never actually his grandson. They are connected by circumstance and choice, not by blood. The Prime Dimension is where the show begins. The first 6 episodes of Season 1 all take place in the Prime Dimension. This is Morty Prime's original home. Then, in Episode 6, something massive happens that changes everything. The episode is called Rick Potion Number 9. In this episode, Morty asks Rick to make him a love potion so his crush Jessica will fall in love with him at a school dance. Rick makes the potion using Vol DNA, but Rick forgets to tell Morty one important thing. The potion will mutate horribly if the person who takes it has the flu. Jessica has the flu. When Morty gives Jessica the potion, it piggybacks on her flu virus and goes airborne. Within minutes, everyone at the school is infected. The potion spreads across the entire planet. Everyone on Earth, except for Morty's blood relatives, falls in love with Morty and wants to mate with him. Rick tries to fix this by making an antidote using praying mantis DNA. This backfires and turns everyone into giant praying mantis creatures that want to mate with Morty and then eat him. Rick makes another antidote using various random DNA sources. This one works in stopping people from wanting to mate with Morty, but it mutates everyone into horrible blob monsters. Rick names them Cronenbergs, after the body horror director David Cronenberg. At this point, Rick realizes the situation is beyond repair. The entire planet is ruined. Everyone except Jerry, Beth, Summer, Rick, and Morty has been turned into disgusting mutant creatures. Rick decides that instead of fixing the problem, they will just abandon the dimension and move to a new one. Rick scans the multiverse, looking for a dimension that is almost identical to theirs. He finds one where that dimension's Rick and Morty successfully cured the love potion disaster, but then died in an explosion in the garage shortly after fixing everything. Rick and Morty portal to this new dimension. They bury their dead, alternate selves in the backyard. Then they take their place in that dimension and pretend to be the Rick and Morty who lived there. Nobody in the family knows what happened except Rick and Morty. Jerry, Beth, and Summer stayed behind in the Prime Dimension. They are still alive there, hunting Cronenbergs for food and surviving in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. The new dimension that Rick and Morty moved to is called Replacement Dimension, or Dimension C-131. This means from Episode 7 onward, Rick and Morty are living with different versions of Beth, Jerry, and Summer. The Beth, Jerry, and Summer in Dimension C-131 are not Morty Prime's biological family members. They are alternates from a different dimension. Morty Prime abandoned his real mother, father, and sister in the Cronenberg dimension. He left them to die in a ruined world while he moved to a new dimension and pretended everything was fine. This traumatizes Morty. The episode ends with Morty having a 1,000-yard stare as he processes what he just did. He buried his own corpse and took his place in a family that is not really his family. Everything he knows is a lie. But life continues, and they pretend like nothing happened. Summer does eventually find out about this. In the episode 60 Minutes from Season 1, Morty shows Summer the graves in the backyard and explains what happened in Rick Potion Number 9. Summer is disturbed, but they both move on. The family living situation gets even more complicated. In Season 2, Episode 2, called Morty Night Run, Rick takes Jerry to a daycare facility for Jerry's called Jerry Bory. This is an interdimensional daycare where Ricks drop off their Jerrys so they do not have to bring them on adventures. Rick gets a ticket with Jerry's information on it when he drops Jerry off. At the end of the episode, Rick loses the ticket. He just picks a Jerry who looks right and takes him home. The episode hints that Rick might have grabbed the wrong Jerry. This gets confirmed in Season 6. The Jerry that Rick picked up at Jerry Bory was not the Jerry from Dimension C-131. It was a Jerry from a different dimension called Dimension 5126. So starting from Morty Night Run, the Jerry living with the family is actually from Dimension 5126, not from Dimension C-131. Nobody knows about this swap until Season 6, when it finally gets revealed. The show keeps dropping hints across multiple seasons that the family composition is wrong. In Season 3, Episode 1, called The Rick Shank Rickdemption, Rick himself tells Summer that she is not even his Summer when they return to the Cronenberg Prime Dimension. This is Rick admitting that Summer from Dimension C-131 is not his real granddaughter. In Season 5, Episode 10, called Rick Murai Jack, Evil Morty shows Morty the full truth about the Citadel. During this episode, Morty learns that Rick C-137 helped build the Citadel. He also learns about the central finite curve. And he starts to realize that his relationship with Rick is more complicated than he thought. But the full truth does not come out until Season 6, Episode 1, called Solarix. Solarix is the episode that confirms everything once and for all. At the end of Season 5, Evil Morty destroyed portal travel by using all the portal fluid in the Citadel to break through the central finite curve. Rick's portal gun stops working. In Solarix, Rick tries to fix his portal gun by resetting the portal fluid, but he makes a mistake. Instead of resetting the portal fluid, he resets all portal travelers. This means everyone who ever used portal technology to travel from their original dimension gets sent back to where they came from. Rick gives Summer instructions on how to bring everyone back. Then the portal travelers get zapped away to their original dimensions. Rick goes to Dimension C-137. Morty goes to the Prime Dimension. Jerry goes to Dimension 5126. When Morty arrives in the Prime Dimension, he sees the Cronenberg wasteland. He finds his original father, Jerry Prime. Jerry Prime is the only survivor left. Beth Prime and Summer Prime both died. Summer Prime was frozen by Citadel Ricks back in Season 3, and later died when she thawed out. Beth Prime got sick from a Cronenberg infection and died. Jerry Prime survived alone in the wasteland and became a hardened warrior. He completely changed his personality. He is no longer the weak loser Jerry that Morty knows. He adopted Rick's nihilistic philosophy and learned to survive in the apocalypse. When Morty tries to reconnect with Jerry Prime and apologize for abandoning him, Jerry Prime rejects Morty. He tells Morty that Morty abandoned him twice, once in Rick Potion number 9 and again when Morty never came back. Jerry Prime wants nothing to do with Morty. This scene confirms that the Prime Dimension is Morty's original home, and these are his real family members. Rick C-137 arrives in his home dimension, Dimension C-137. He finds his old house where Diane and Beth died. Rick kept this dimension on a time loop, so the day of their deaths repeats forever. He even programmed an AI voice of Diane to haunt him as punishment. Rick realizes he needs to move on from his quest for revenge. The AI Diane suggests that if Rick got reset to his home dimension, then Rick Prime probably also got reset to his home dimension. This means Rick Prime is back in the Prime Dimension where Morty currently is. Rick flies through the rift that evil Morty created to reach the Prime Dimension. He finds Morty and picks him up. Then Rick reveals the truth to Morty. He tells Morty that the Prime Dimension is Rick Prime's home dimension, and that Rick Prime is Morty's real biological grandfather. He explains that Rick C-137 moved into the Prime Dimension specifically to wait for Rick Prime to return so he could kill him. This is a devastating revelation for Morty. He learns that Rick has been using him as bait this entire time. Meanwhile, Jerry arrives in Dimension 5126. He finds his original family from that dimension. They are having the same dinner they had back in Season 2. Nothing has changed in Dimension 5126. Jerry Prime from that dimension is still unemployed, and everyone still hates him. In Dimension 5126, Jerry and Beth never got divorced like they did in Season 3. Jerry realizes that going through the divorce actually helped him grow as a person. He appreciates the family he has been living with since Season 2. Rick and Morty rescue Jerry from Dimension 5126 and bring him back. The entire family returns to Dimension C-131, where they have been living since Rick Potion number 9. But when they get home, they find another Jerry there. This Jerry is the original Jerry from Dimension C-131. He is the Jerry who was supposed to be with them all along, but got swapped at Jerry Bory back in Season 2. He has been taking a shower upstairs waiting for them to return. This Jerry is cold and mean because he did not go through the character development that the other Jerry went through. There is one more twist. The Jerry from Dimension C-131 gets bitten by a parasitic creature called Mr. Frundles that turns everything it touches into copies of itself. Within seconds, Mr. Frundles takes over the entire planet Earth in Dimension C-131. The family has to abandon that dimension and move to yet another replacement dimension. They find a dimension where everyone in the family died at exactly the same time, from natural causes. They bury these bodies and take their place. The only difference in this new dimension is that people pronounce the word Parmesan in a weird way. So now the family is living in what fans call the Parmesan dimension. This is their third dimension overall. First, the Prime dimension, then Dimension C-131, now the Parmesan dimension. The Jerry who came with them is from Dimension 5126. Beth and Summer are from Dimension C-131. Morty is from the Prime dimension. Rick is from Dimension C-137. They are a completely patchwork family from 4 different dimensions, living together and pretending to be a normal family unit. All of this proves, beyond any doubt, that our Morty is not Rick C-137's original Morty. Rick C-137 never had a Morty because his Beth died as a child. Our Morty is Morty Prime from the Prime dimension, and he is the biological grandson of Rick Prime, not Rick C-137. Rick C-137 moved in with Rick Prime's abandoned family and has been pretending to be their Rick for years. The show establishes this through careful storytelling across 6 seasons. Rick Potion number 9 shows the first dimension jump. Solarix confirms everyone's original dimensions by sending them back there. The Jerry Bory incident adds another layer, showing that even Jerry is not from the right dimension. The entire family we watch is made up of people from different dimensions, who ended up together through accidents, swaps, and Rick's choices. They are not a real family in the traditional biological sense. They are a found family who stick together despite learning these truths about their origins. And that makes their relationship more meaningful in some ways because they choose to stay together, knowing they are not actually related. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the theory that Mortys are brainwave camouflage for Ricks. There is one scientific reason that explains why every Rick in the multiverse keeps a Morty by their side. It is not about love, or family, or teaching lessons. It is about survival. Mortys serve as brainwave camouflage for Ricks. This gets revealed in Season 1, Episode 10, called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. The episode explains that Rick gives off a specific kind of brainwave because of his genius. These genius brainwaves are very distinctive and very traceable. Anyone with the right technology can detect a Rick from far away just by scanning for these unique genius brainwaves. This makes every Rick a walking target for their enemies, and Rick has many enemies. Galactic terrorists want him dead, subgalactic dictators want him dead, most of the intergalactic government wants him dead. Rick describes it as, everywhere you find people with their heads up their butts, someone wants a piece of your grandpa. So Rick's needed a way to hide from all these powerful enemies who want to track them down and kill them. The solution is Morty. Morty's brainwaves are described as complementary to Rick's brainwaves. When Rick stands near Morty, Morty's brainwaves cancel out Rick's genius brainwaves. It works like noise-canceling technology. If you have a sound wave and you play the exact opposite sound wave at the same time, the two waves cancel each other out and you hear nothing. The same principle applies to brainwaves in the Rick and Morty universe. Rick's genius brainwaves and Morty's brainwaves somehow work as opposites. When they are together, the two brainwave patterns cancel each other out. This makes Rick invisible to anyone scanning for genius brainwaves. Rick becomes completely undetectable to his enemies. This is why Rick calls Morty a camouflage. Morty is not Rick's grandson in any meaningful emotional sense. Morty is a human cloaking device. Morty is a tool that Rick uses to hide from radar. This revelation happens during a conversation between Rick and Morty while they are on the run from the Council of Ricks. Morty just saw the Citadel for the first time. He saw thousands of Ricks and thousands of Mortys from different dimensions, all living together. At first, Morty felt disappointed because seeing so many versions of himself and Rick made him think their bond was not special. But then Morty convinced himself that their relationship must be special to span across all those different timelines. He thought maybe he and Rick had something unique that connected them across infinite realities. Rick immediately crushes this hope. Rick tells Morty it has to be that way. Morty asks what Rick means. Rick explains that Morty is camouflage. Morty does not understand at first. Rick explains that Ricks have very distinctive and traceable brainwaves due to their genius. The best way to hide from an enemy's radar is to stand near someone with complementary brainwaves that make Rick's brainwaves invisible. When a Rick is with a Morty, the genius waves get cancelled out by the Morty waves. Morty tries to make this sound better than it is. He asks Rick if their brainwaves are complementary because their personalities are so different. Maybe Rick is logical and cold, while Morty is emotional and warm, and those opposite traits create opposite brainwaves. Rick does not answer this question. He just moves on to the next topic. This non-answer tells us a lot. Rick either does not know why the brainwaves cancel each other out, or he does not want to tell Morty the real reason. The implication from Rick's silence is that Morty waves cancel Rick waves because Morty is stupid. That is the joke the show is making. Morty is so unintelligent that his brain produces the exact opposite waves of a genius brain. Morty is useful specifically because he is dumb. His stupidity is what makes him valuable to Rick. This is devastating for Morty to learn. Up until this moment, Morty thought Rick took him on adventures because Rick cared about him or because they had a special bond. Now Morty learns that Rick keeps him around for purely practical reasons. Morty is a piece of safety equipment. Morty serves the same function as a bulletproof vest or a shield. Rick uses Morty to stay alive. The relationship is not based on love or family connection. It is based on utility. Morty becomes upset with Rick after learning this. He questions their entire relationship. He wonders if anything between them is real or if he has just been a tool this whole time. The episode does show that Rick cares about Morty more than he admits, but the brainwave camouflage revelation still stands. Every Rick across the multiverse keeps a Morty for this exact reason. It is not a coincidence that most timelines have a Rick and most Ricks have a Morty. This pairing exists because Ricks need Mortys to survive. The brainwave camouflage concept is not just theoretical. The episode proves it works through the main villain. There is an evil version of Rick who is killing other Ricks across dimensions. This evil Rick kidnapped hundreds of Mortys and built a dome-shaped fortress. The walls of this dome are covered from top to bottom with naked Mortys. These Mortys are strapped to the surface of the dome and constantly being tortured. Machines stab their sides over and over again in a rhythmic pattern. The Mortys scream in pain non-stop. The torture is intentional. When Mortys are in extreme pain, their brainwaves become stronger and more active. One Morty producing normal brainwaves is enough to hide one Rick from basic detection. But hundreds of Mortys screaming in agony create a massive pattern of brainwaves that can hide someone even from other Ricks. The Citadel of Ricks has very advanced technology. They can track Ricks even when those Ricks are standing next to one Morty. But hundreds of tortured Mortys create so much brainwave noise that even the Citadel cannot detect what is hiding inside. When Morty sees this torture dome, he is horrified. He asks why someone would do something so horrible. Rick explains the concept casually. He says one Morty is enough to hide from the bureaucrats. But if you get a whole matrix of Mortys and put them in agonizing pain, that creates a pattern that can hide even from other Ricks. Then Rick admits something shocking. He says he fiddled with a concept like this once. He thought about building a torture dome of Mortys. Morty looks at Rick with horror and disgust. Rick quickly backtracks. He says he only thought about it on paper. He would never actually do it because it is barbaric overkill. Then Rick makes it even worse by explaining that you could accomplish the same result with just 5 Mortys and a jumper cable. Morty glares at Rick. Rick realizes how bad this sounds and adds that he would not do that either. He is just saying it is bad craftsmanship to use hundreds of Mortys when 5 would work. This scene reveals how Ricks think about Mortys. Even the good Rick, the Rick we follow in the show, considered building a torture device powered by Morty's suffering. He thought about the engineering problem and figured out the minimum number of Mortys needed to hide from other Ricks. The fact that Rick calculated this means he seriously considered doing it. He ultimately decided not to build a Morty torture dome, but only because it was overkill and inefficient. Not because it was morally wrong. The evil Rick, who actually built the dome, just took Rick's theoretical concept and made it real. This proves that Ricks across the multiverse view Mortys as objects to be used. They are not grandchildren, they are tools. The brainwave camouflage is their primary function. The episode also reveals that the evil Rick is not actually in control. He is a cyborg puppet being controlled remotely by his Morty through an eye patch device. This Morty, who everyone calls Evil Morty, is the one who built the torture dome and killed 27 Ricks. Evil Morty kidnapped hundreds of Mortys from different dimensions to use as cloaking devices. He needed the torture dome to hide from the Citadel while he worked on his real plan. The Citadel never detected Evil Morty because the massive amount of Morty brainwaves from the tortured Mortys hid everything. This shows that the brainwave camouflage concept is powerful enough to hide even the most wanted criminals in the multiverse if they use enough Mortys. Evil Morty understood how Ricks use Mortys as camouflage, and he used that same system against them. The Citadel of Ricks is built entirely around this brainwave concept. The Citadel is a society where thousands of Ricks and Mortys live together. At the Citadel, Mortys are treated like commodities. There are Morty insurance salesmen who try to sell Rick insurance policies in case their Morty gets injured. There are advertisements for Morty accessories like Morty Dazzlers that turn your boring old Morty into a hot fashion statement. Mortys get bought and sold and traded. Ricks pick them up from agencies. When Rick and Morty visit the Citadel, they see a customer service desk specifically for assigning Mortys to Ricks. The whole system operates like Mortys are pets or employees rather than people. This treatment makes sense once you understand that Mortys exist primarily as camouflage devices. They serve a function. They hide genius brainwaves. That is their job. Some Ricks probably do care about their Mortys on an emotional level, but the foundational reason every Rick has a Morty is practical rather than emotional. This gets reinforced later in the series. In Season 5, Episode 10, called Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty reveals even darker truths about how the Citadel uses Mortys. He shows Morty Prime that the Citadel has been mass-producing Mortys for years. The Citadel Ricks realized that rogue Ricks could use Mortys to hide from the Citadel's detection systems. So the Citadel created what Evil Morty calls a Morty market. They manipulate events in different dimensions to force Beths and Jerrys to fall in love and have children. This ensures that every dimension inside the central finite curve produces Mortys. When natural reproduction is not enough, the Citadel starts making Morty clones in factories. These clones get mass-produced and shipped across the multiverse to Ricks who need them. When a Morty dies, the Citadel makes a new clone, gives it the dead Morty's memories, and sends it to replace the dead one. The Rick, who owns that Morty, never knows the difference. This system exists because Mortys are valuable. They are valuable specifically because they hide genius brainwaves. The Citadel needs a constant supply of Mortys to keep all the Ricks safe from detection. Evil Morty explains this to Morty Prime to show him how Ricks really view Mortys. Mortys are bred for camouflage. That is their primary purpose. Mortys are also bred for forgiveness, which means Ricks engineered Mortys to be emotionally dependent and forgiving so they would never leave or turn against their Ricks. But the brainwave camouflage is the foundation. Without that function, Ricks would have no reason to keep Mortys around at all. Evil Morty became evil specifically because he understood this truth. He realized he was living in a system where he and every other Morty existed as tools for Ricks. They were not people with their own value. They were objects designed to serve Rick's needs. Evil Morty wanted to escape from this system entirely, which is why he worked so hard to break through the central finite curve and leave the Rick-controlled multiverse behind. The brainwave camouflage concept explains many things about the show. It explains why Rick is so casual about putting Morty in danger. If Morty dies, Rick can just get another Morty from a different dimension who serves the same camouflage function. It explains why there are thousands of Mortys at the Citadel being treated like second-class citizens. They exist to serve Ricks, so they have no rights or freedom beyond what Ricks give them. It explains why the relationship between Rick and Morty often feels toxic and one-sided. Rick is using Morty, That is the foundational truth of their relationship. Rick may have come to care about Morty over time, but he originally took Morty on adventures because he needed brainwave camouflage to stay alive. Everything else developed later. The show does suggest that Rick C-137 is different from most Ricks in how he treats Morty. During the torture dome scene, Rick sheds tears when he is forced to watch his own memories of Morty. The memories show Rick holding baby Morty and spending time with young Morty. Rick clearly has emotional attachment, even though he would never admit it out loud. At the end of the episode, Rick tells Morty that he is the Mortiest Morty of all the Mortys. This is Rick's way of saying Morty is special to him without actually saying he cares. But even with this emotional connection, the practical reality remains. Rick keeps Morty around because Morty hides Rick's genius brainwaves from enemies. That is the reason every Rick has a Morty across infinite dimensions. It is not about love. It is about survival. The brainwave camouflage concept is one of the darkest revelations in the entire show. It recontextualizes everything we know about Rick and Morty's relationship. Every adventure they go on, Rick is using Morty as a human shield against detection. Every time Rick takes Morty somewhere dangerous, he is bringing his camouflage device along. Morty thinks they are bonding. Rick knows Morty is serving a function. This creates a fundamental imbalance in their relationship that never fully goes away. Morty can never be sure if Rick actually cares about him or if he just needs him for practical reasons. The show suggests Rick does care, but it also shows that care developing on top of a foundation built on utility. Rick needed camouflage. Morty provided camouflage. Everything else came after that basic transaction. The episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind establishes this concept clearly and canonically. Rick's explanation to Morty is straightforward. Ricks have distinctive, traceable brainwaves due to genius. Mortys have complementary brainwaves that cancel out Rick's brainwaves. This makes Ricks invisible to their enemies. Therefore, every Rick keeps a Morty. The torture dome proves the concept works. Hundreds of tortured Mortys created enough brainwave interference to hide evil Morty from the entire Citadel. Later episodes reinforce this concept by showing how the Citadel mass produces Mortys to meet demand. The whole system depends on Mortys serving as brainwave camouflage for Ricks. That is why Mortys exist in the Rick and Morty multiverse. They are not accidents of biology. They are engineered necessities. They are the solution to a problem that Ricks face. And that problem is that genius makes you a target. The only way to hide genius is to stand next to someone whose brainwaves cancel yours out. That someone is Morty. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the theory that Evil Morty was the true mastermind from day one. Evil Morty was the true villain of Rick and Morty from the very first moment he appeared. The show made everyone think they were watching a story about an evil version of Rick terrorizing the multiverse. But the final minutes of Season 1, Episode 10, called Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, revealed the truth. The eye patch-wearing Morty, who seemed like a helpless sidekick, was actually the mastermind controlling everything. He was pulling the strings the entire time. This revelation changed everything we thought we knew about the episode. It also set up a long game plan that would not pay off until years later in Season 3 and Season 5. Evil Morty had a plan from day one, and every single thing he did was a calculated step toward his ultimate goal of escaping the central finite curve. The episode starts with what looks like a typical Rick and Morty adventure gone wrong. An evil-looking Rick with a facial scar and dark circles under his eyes appears through a portal with his Morty, who wears an eye patch. This evil Rick shoots another Rick in the head and kills him instantly. His Morty tranquilizes that Rick's Morty and kidnaps him. The scene happens so fast that you barely have time to process it. Then the next morning reveals this was not our Rick and Morty. It was a different dimension. Our Rick gets arrested by the Council of Ricks for crimes he did not commit. The council accuses Rick C-137 of murdering 27 Ricks from different dimensions and kidnapping their Mortys. Rick did not do this. Someone framed him. Someone killed those Ricks and made it look like Rick C-137 was responsible. Rick escapes from the council with Morty, and they track down the real killer. They follow the signal from Rick's hacked portal gun to a swampy planet. On this planet sits a massive dome covered entirely with hundreds of naked Mortys strapped to the surface. Machines constantly stab these Mortys in their sides, causing them to scream in endless agony. The torture is intentional. The pain makes their brainwaves stronger, creating a camouflage shield so powerful that even other Ricks cannot detect what is hiding inside the dome. Rick and Morty break into the dome and find the evil Rick. This Rick captures them. He ties Rick C-137 to a table and starts downloading all of Rick's memories from his brain. While the download happens, evil Rick mocks Rick C-137. He tells Rick that Ricks do not care about Mortys. He conducts the screams of the tortured Mortys like an orchestra. Meanwhile, Morty C-137 gets thrown into a prison with all the other kidnapped Mortys. These Mortys have given up hope. Some of them have formed a religious cult that believes in the one true Morty who will save them. But Morty C-137 refuses to give up. He gives a speech to the other Mortys. He tells them they can fight back. He leads a rebellion. The Mortys break out of prison and storm Evil Rick's laboratory. They beat Evil Rick to death with their bare hands. Evil Rick actually begs them to kill him faster. He wants to die. The Council of Ricks shows up after Evil Rick is already dead. They start investigating the crime scene. Rick C-137 is cleared of all charges since they found the real killer. The Council takes all the rescued Mortys back to the Citadel, where they will be safe and assigned to new Ricks. Everything seems resolved. The bad guy is dead. The Mortys are saved. Rick is proven innocent. But then comes the ending. 2 Rick investigators examine Evil Rick's corpse. They discover something shocking. Evil Rick has a receiver implanted in his brain. Someone was controlling him remotely this entire time. Evil Rick was not the villain. He was a puppet. The camera cuts to the crowd of rescued Mortys boarding ships to the Citadel. One Morty stands among them, wearing an eye patch. This is the Morty who was with Evil Rick throughout the episode. He reaches up and removes his eye patch. The eye patch contains a transmitter device. He looks at it for a moment. Then he drops it on the ground and crushes it under his foot. He destroyed the evidence. Now he looks exactly like every other Morty. He blends into the crowd with no one suspecting him. The song For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead starts playing. This song becomes Evil Morty's theme throughout the series. The episode ends on this reveal. This twist changes everything about the episode. Evil Rick was not evil by choice. He was a cyborg slave, being controlled by his Morty through the eye patch device. Every word that came out of Evil Rick's mouth was actually Evil Morty's words. Every action Evil Rick took was Evil Morty directing him. Evil Morty killed 27 Ricks across dimensions. Evil Morty kidnapped hundreds of Mortys and built the torture dome. Evil Morty framed Rick C-137 for these crimes. Evil Morty scanned Rick C-137's brain to steal his memories and knowledge. Evil Morty orchestrated everything. He is smarter than Rick. He outplayed the Council of Ricks. He committed mass murder and walked away without anyone suspecting him. He gained access to the Citadel by posing as a victim. Now, he is inside the Citadel with all of Rick C-137's memories in a database he can access whenever he wants. The episode shows that Evil Morty was always in control, but nobody noticed. When Rick and Morty first arrive at the dome, Evil Rick and Eye Patch Morty greet them. Evil Rick does all the talking, while Eye Patch Morty stays silent. Eye Patch Morty quietly takes Morty C-137 to the prison without saying a single word. He never draws attention to himself. He acts like a typical helpless Morty sidekick, but he was the one giving all the orders the whole time. During the rebellion when the Mortys beat Evil Rick to death, Eye Patch Morty just watches. He lets it happen. He actually needed Evil Rick to die so he could dispose of the evidence and escape undetected. Evil Rick even begs the Mortys to finish killing him. This makes more sense, knowing Evil Morty was forcing him to do terrible things against his will. Evil Rick wanted to die to escape from Evil Morty's control. Season 7 later reveals Evil Morty's full origin story in an episode called Unmortrican. The episode shows that Evil Morty started as a normal Morty, going on adventures with his Rick. His Rick was abusive and constantly put Evil Morty in dangerous, humiliating situations. One day, after a particularly bad adventure, Evil Morty and his Rick got into an argument. His Rick challenged him to quit if he was so unhappy. Evil Morty left the garage but came back with a drink. He offered it to his Rick as a peace offering. His Rick drank it and got blackout drunk. While his Rick was unconscious drunk, Evil Morty built the mind control device. He surgically attached receivers to his Rick's brain and turned him into a cyborg puppet. From that moment forward, Evil Morty controlled his Rick completely. He used his Rick to go to the Citadel. He erased all records of himself and his Rick from the Citadel database so nobody could identify them. Then he started his plan. Evil Morty's plan in Season 1 was to get information. He needed to learn about the Citadel. He needed to understand how it was built and how it worked. He killed Ricks to study them and absorb their knowledge. He kidnapped Mortys to use as camouflage. He specifically targeted Rick C-137 because Evil Morty somehow knew that Rick C-137 helped build the Citadel. Rick C-137 had knowledge that nobody else had, so Evil Morty framed Rick C-137 for murder to lure him out. He knew Rick would track him down. When Rick arrived, Evil Morty scanned Rick's brain and downloaded all his memories. He got exactly what he wanted. Then, he let the Mortys kill Evil Rick while he escaped with all of Rick C-137's knowledge stored in a database. He blended into the crowd of rescued Mortys and entered the Citadel as one of many victims. Nobody suspected that one of the rescued Mortys was actually the mastermind behind everything. Evil Morty disappears for 3 years in real time. His story does not continue until Season 3, Episode 7, called the Ricklantis Mix-Up. This episode takes place entirely at the Citadel, with none of the main characters appearing, except in a brief post-credits scene. The episode follows different Ricks and Mortys living in the Citadel, after Rick C-137 destroyed it in the Season 3 premiere. The Citadel is being rebuilt as a democracy. They are holding elections to choose the first president. Several Ricks run for president. One Morty also runs. This Morty calls himself Candidate Morty. He represents the Morty Party. Nobody takes him seriously. The Ricks mock him during debates. Even his own campaign manager does not believe he can win. But Candidate Morty gives a powerful speech during the presidential debate. He talks about how Mortys are treated as second-class citizens. He talks about the class divide between Ricks and Mortys. He promises change. He promises to make the Citadel better for everyone. The crowd loves him. Suddenly, he becomes a real contender in the race. Right after this speech, he fires his campaign manager for doubting him. The campaign manager is shocked. Later, a mysterious Rick in a trench coat gives the campaign manager a file folder. Inside this folder are documents revealing Candidate Morty's true identity. The documents show that Candidate Morty is actually Eye Patch Morty from Season 1. The campaign manager is horrified. He realizes he was working for a mass murderer. The campaign manager tries to stop Evil Morty. He shows up at Evil Morty's next rally with a gun. He shoots Candidate Morty in front of everyone, but Evil Morty survives. He wore protection. The assassination attempt actually helps him win the election, because now he looks like a martyr. The campaign manager gets arrested immediately. 2 Rick Secret Service agents throw the campaign manager out of an airlock into space as punishment for trying to kill the president-elect. As he dies, these agents casually mention that Candidate Morty survived and won the election in a close race. The campaign manager desperately tries to show them the documents proving Candidate Morty is Evil Morty. They ignore him. He gets ejected into space, where his corpse joins hundreds of other corpses floating outside the Citadel. Evil Morty becomes President Morty. He meets with the Shadow Council of Ricks, who actually run the Citadel behind the scenes. They tell President Morty that he is just a figurehead. They expect him to do what they say. President Morty asks them who thinks they can oppose him. Some of the Ricks raise their hands. President Morty snaps his fingers. Rick guards shoot all the Ricks who raise their hands. Their corpses get thrown out of airlocks into space. President Morty tells the surviving Shadow Council members that they can stay and help him, or they can oppose him and die. They all choose to stay. President Morty has complete control of the Citadel now. The episode ends with the song for the damaged coda playing again. The camera shows all the corpses floating in space outside the Citadel. Among these corpses is the campaign manager, with the documents revealing President Morty is Evil Morty, floating next to his body. The audience sees the documents, but nobody in the show does. This episode shows Evil Morty's long game continuing. He spent 3 years hiding in the Citadel, studying how it worked. He created a fake identity as Candidate Morty. He ran a calculated political campaign designed to win over both Ricks and Mortys. He gave speeches that sounded genuine and caring. He made himself look like a champion of the oppressed, but it was all manipulation. He never cared about helping anyone. He wanted power. He wanted control of the Citadel, and he got it through lies and murder. The assassination attempt was likely part of his plan. He probably arranged for the mysterious Rick to give the campaign manager the documents, knowing the campaign manager would try to kill him. Evil Morty used this assassination attempt to gain sympathy votes and win the election. Then, he purged everyone who could oppose him. Within hours of taking office, he became an absolute dictator. President Morty runs the Citadel for 2 years in real time before the story continues. Season 5, Episode 10, called Rick Mirai Jack, brings Evil Morty back for the final phase of his plan. By this point, President Morty has built a secret machine underneath the Citadel. Deformed Mortys work in horrible conditions building this dimensional drive. Rick C-137 and Morty visit the Citadel. President Morty invites them to dinner. During dinner, he scans Rick's brain again to finish getting the information he needs. He already had most of Rick's memories from Season 1. Now he completes the scan. He has everything he needs to execute his final plan. President Morty reveals the truth to Morty Prime. He shows him that the Citadel mass produces Mortys. He shows him how Ricks manipulate Beths and Jerrys to create Mortys. He explains the central finite curve and how Ricks trap themselves in universes where they are always the smartest beings. Then President Morty activates the dimensional drive. The machine uses the blood and bodies of dead Ricks and Mortys as fuel. It creates a massive wormhole that tears through the central finite curve. President Morty escapes through this wormhole in a small spaceship. He punches through dimensional barriers until he reaches the other side of the curve. The Citadel explodes behind him. Almost every Rick and Morty living there dies. Evil Morty succeeded. He destroyed the Citadel. He escaped the central finite curve. He broke free from the Rick-controlled multiverse. He achieved exactly what he set out to do from day one. His plan took years to complete across 3 separate episodes, but every step was calculated. Framing Rick Cone, 137 inches, Season 1 gave him access to Rick's knowledge and the Citadel. Becoming president in Season 3 gave him control of the Citadel's resources and the ability to build the dimensional drive. Destroying the Citadel in Season 5 gave him freedom from the curve. Evil Morty was always the mastermind. From the moment he appeared in Season 1, he was playing a game nobody else understood. He manipulated everyone. He killed thousands. He destroyed the Citadel. And he walked away victorious. The Eye Patch Morty, who looked harmless in Season 1, was the most dangerous character in the entire show. He outsmarted Rick. He beat the system. He proved that a Morty could be just as intelligent and ruthless as any Rick. The reveal at the end of Season 1, Episode 10, reframes the entire episode. Evil Rick was not the villain. He was a victim. Eye Patch Morty was the true mastermind controlling everything from behind the scenes. And his long game plan that started in that first episode finally succeeded 5 seasons later when he escaped the central finite curve and left the Rick and Morty universe forever. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Cronenberg, Earth Persisting, and Cronenberg Jerry's canonical death. Cronenberg Earth persists, and Cronenberg Jerry dies canonically. Rick and Morty made one of the biggest mistakes in television history during the first season. They turned their entire world into a nightmare and then just left. The show created a whole dimension full of horrible monsters and abandoned the original Smith family to die there. For years, fans wondered what happened to that destroyed world. Season 6 finally gave the answer. And it was way worse than anyone expected. The disaster started in Season 1, Episode 6, called Rick Potion Number 9. Morty had a huge crush on a girl named Jessica at his school. There was a dance coming up, and Morty wanted Jessica to notice him. So, he asked Rick to make him a love potion. Rick agreed, and created a serum using vole DNA. Voles are animals that mate for life. Rick thought this would make Jessica fall in love with Morty forever. Morty went to the school dance, and gave the potion to Jessica. But Jessica had the flu. The love potion chemicals attached to the flu virus inside Jessica's body. The potion became airborne. It spread through the entire school in minutes. Everyone at the dance fell madly in love with Morty. They all wanted to be with him forever. The infection kept spreading beyond the school. It went to the whole town, then the whole country, then the entire planet. Billions of people all fell desperately in love with Morty Smith at the same time. Rick tried to fix the problem. He created an antidote using praying mantis DNA. His logic was that praying mantises kill their partners after mating. That is the opposite of voles, who mate for life. Rick thought this would reverse the love potion effect. He mixed the mantis DNA with an even stronger flu virus to make sure it spread fast. Rick released the cure into the atmosphere. It did not work the way he planned. Instead of curing everyone, the antidote turned all the infected people into giant human mantis hybrids. These mantis people still loved Morty. But now, they also wanted to kill him after mating with him. The situation went from bad to much worse. Rick had to try again. He made another antidote to fix the mantis problem. This third attempt failed even harder than the second one. The new cure turned everyone on Earth into horrible, deformed monsters. Rick called them Cronenbergs, after the famous horror movie director David Cronenberg, who made films about body horror and disgusting mutations. These Cronenberg monsters were fleshy blobs with tentacles and teeth and eyes in wrong places. They were barely human anymore. The entire population of Earth became these creatures. 7 billion people transformed into nightmarish abominations. Only 3 people stayed human: Jerry Smith, Beth Smith, and Summer Smith. They did not get infected because they shared DNA with Morty. The love potion and all the antidotes only affected people who were not genetically related to Morty, so his dad, mom, and sister were immune. But everyone else on the planet turned into monsters. Rick looked at the situation and decided it was unfixable. He could not reverse what he had done. The whole world was destroyed. Instead of trying to save it, Rick had a different plan. He used his portal gun to scan the infinite multiverse for a very specific type of dimension. He searched for a reality where events happened almost exactly the same as his reality. A dimension where that version of Rick and Morty also created the Cronenberg disaster. But in that dimension, those versions of Rick and Morty actually found a cure. They reversed all the mutations and saved their world. And then right after saving everything, those alternate Rick and Morty died in a freak accident in their garage. Rick found this exact scenario in the multiverse. He opened a portal to that dimension. He took Morty through the portal with him. They arrived in this new dimension where everything was normal. No Cronenbergs, no monsters, just regular Earth. But this dimension's Rick and Morty were dead in the garage. Their bodies were blown apart by an explosion. Rick told Morty they were going to take the place of these dead versions. They were going to bury the bodies and pretend to be them. Morty was horrified. He had to help Rick dig graves in the backyard. They buried their own dead bodies. Then they went inside the house and just continued living as if nothing happened. The Beth, Jerry, and Summer in this new dimension had no idea their real Rick and Morty were dead. They thought these were the same Rick and Morty who had just saved the world from the Cronenberg infection. Rick told Morty this trick of jumping dimensions and replacing dead versions of themselves could only work a few more times, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times tops. After that, there would not be any more dimensions to jump to. Rick casually mentioned he had probably done this before. Morty was traumatized by the whole experience. He sat on the couch in his new home with a 1,000-yard stare. Everything he knew was gone. He left behind his real family, his real Beth and Jerry and Summer. They were trapped in the Cronenberg dimension with no way out, no portal gun, no Rick to help them, just monsters everywhere and an apocalyptic wasteland. The episode ended with that disturbing image. But then came the post-credits scene. This scene showed what happened to the original Smith family after Rick and Morty abandoned them. Jerry, Beth, and Summer had armor welded onto a van. They were living like post-apocalyptic survivors in a Mad Max movie. They sat around a fire roasting a dead Cronenberg like it was a pig at a barbecue. Summer was performing scenes from movies for entertainment. They had no TV or internet or phones, so Summer acted out films from memory to pass the time. She was doing Jaws when the scene started. Beth and Jerry talked while they ate the roasted Cronenberg meat. Jerry said they never needed Rick and Morty anyway. Beth agreed. She actually said she felt happier now that Rick and Morty were gone. Jerry and Beth were closer than they had been in years. Before the Cronenberg disaster, their marriage was falling apart. Jerry was unemployed and insecure. Beth resented him for holding her back. They fought all the time, but the apocalypse changed everything. Jerry became a tough survivor. He learned to hunt and kill the Cronenberg monsters. He protected his family. Beth respected him again. Maybe for the first time in their marriage, she saw Jerry as an equal. They reconnected. Their relationship was stronger in this horrible new world than it ever was in the normal world. The Cronenberg dimension actually saved their marriage. The show left that world alone for a while. Rick and Morty stayed in the new dimension called Dimension C-131. They went on adventures. The Cronenberg world was barely mentioned. But it came back in Season 3, Episode 1, called The Rick Shank Rickdemption. That episode had Morty bringing his new dimension, Summer, back to the Cronenberg world. Morty wanted to show her how terrible Rick really was. He wanted Summer to understand that Rick destroys everything he touches. They arrived in the Cronenberg dimension. The place looked even worse than before. When they got there, a robot butler from the new dimension tried to attack them. Jerry Prime came out of nowhere. He shot the robot with a makeshift gun. Beth Prime and Summer Prime appeared too. They were feral now, wild. They wore clothes made from Cronenberg's skin. They ate Cronenberg meat. They had become savage warriors. Jerry was the leader. He had a thick beard and carried weapons. Beth was muscular and tough. Summer was skilled at survival. They did not recognize Morty at first. Then they realized this was their Morty who abandoned them. They wanted him to stay with them. They tried to force him. They were about to attack the new Summer. But then a squad of Ricks from the Citadel teleported into the dimension. These Ricks, called SEAL Team Ricks, arrived to investigate something. They saw the Smith family acting crazy. They pulled out freeze guns. They shot Jerry, Beth, and Summer with these weapons. The three of them froze solid instantly. Their bodies turned to ice. They stopped moving. They were completely frozen. The Ricks took Morty and the new Summer away to the Citadel. They left the frozen Smith family behind in the Cronenberg world. The episode never showed what happened to those frozen bodies. It never confirmed if they survived or died. Fans assumed they were still alive. Still frozen, but alive. That was the last time anyone saw them until Season 6. Season 6, Episode 1, called Solarix, brought everything full circle. Rick tried to fix his portal gun after evil Morty destroyed all portal travel at the end of Season 5. Rick attempted to reset the portal fluid system, but he made a mistake. Instead of resetting portal travel, he reset portal travelers. Every single person who ever used a portal gun got sent back to their original home dimension. This included Rick, Morty, and even Jerry. Rick got sent to Dimension C-137, which was his real home. This was the dimension where Rick Prime killed his wife Diane and his daughter Beth. Morty got sent back to the Cronenberg dimension. That was his original home. He was born there. The Jerry traveling with Rick and Morty also got sent somewhere else because of a mix-up from a different episode. When the portal reset happened, Morty found himself back in the Cronenberg dimension for the first time since Season 1. He walked around the destroyed world. Everything was dead and ruined. Cronenberg monsters were everywhere. The buildings were falling apart. The streets were empty. It looked like the end of the world. Morty searched for his original family. He called out for them. He found his dad. Jerry Prime was alone. He lived by himself in a Barnes & Noble bookstore. He had converted the bookstore into his home base. He read books to pass the time. He ate Cronenberg brains to survive. He wore dirty clothes and looked tired. Morty was happy to see him. But Jerry was not happy to see Morty. Jerry was cold and distant. Morty asked about Beth and Summer. Jerry told him they were dead, both of them, gone. Beth died from an infection. The Cronenbergs carried diseases. Beth got sick from fighting them or eating them. The infection killed her. It happened sometime after the freeze. Summer died too, but in a different way. Jerry explained that after the Citadel, Ricks froze them. Some creature eventually broke them out of the ice. They thawed out. But Beth and Summer did not survive the thawing process properly. Their bodies could not handle going from frozen to normal temperature. Summer died from complications during the thaw. Jerry was the only one who survived. He was completely alone in the Cronenberg dimension. He had been alone for a long time, maybe months, maybe years. The timeline was not clear. Morty felt terrible. He started crying. He realized he abandoned his family, and they all died because of it. If Rick never made the love potion, none of this would have happened. If they never left this dimension, maybe Beth and Summer would still be alive. Morty tried to reconnect with Jerry. He suggested they play a board game together. There was a game called Downbeat under his old bed. Morty thought maybe they could bond. Jerry seemed interested at first. They sat down. They talked a little. Jerry had changed completely. He was not the weak, scared Jerry that Morty remembered. The apocalypse hardened him. He read self-help books like The 4 Agreements and The Dark Knight Returns. He learned to let go of attachments. He adopted a cold philosophy about survival. He told Morty that caring about people was weakness. He said love was a trap. He became exactly like Rick, nihilistic and emotionally detached. While they talked, Jerry secretly planned something. When Morty was not paying attention, Jerry grabbed all of Morty's supplies. He stole Morty's food and equipment. Then he ran away. He abandoned his own son. Jerry left Morty completely alone in the Cronenberg wasteland with nothing. Morty screamed after him, but Jerry was gone. Jerry became so damaged by the apocalypse that he stopped caring about his own child. He blamed Morty for leaving him. He blamed Morty for Beth and Summer dying, so he took his revenge by abandoning Morty the same way Morty abandoned him. Rick C. 137 eventually showed up and rescued Morty. They left the Cronenberg dimension together. Rick revealed something important during this episode. The Cronenberg dimension was not Rick C. 137's original home. It was actually Rick Prime's home dimension. Rick Prime was the evil Rick who killed Rick C. 137's family. Rick C. 137 had been living in Rick Prime's dimension for years, hoping Rick Prime would eventually come back so Rick could kill him. That is why Rick lived with that specific Smith family. He was waiting for his enemy to return. The whole setup of the show was based on this fact. Our Rick was living in his enemy's dimension, with his enemy's family trying to catch his enemy. That is why Rick cared about Morty. Morty was the grandson of Rick's greatest enemy. The episode ended with Rick and Morty leaving the Cronenberg dimension again. But there was a post-credits scene. This scene showed Jerry Prime alone in the wasteland. He was walking through the destroyed city. Suddenly, Rick Prime appeared. Rick Prime was the original Rick from the Cronenberg dimension. He was Morty's real biological grandfather. He was the most evil Rick in the entire multiverse. The portal reset sent him back to his home dimension too, just like it sent everyone else home. Rick Prime's spaceship crashed into the Cronenberg Earth. He climbed out of the wreckage. He was naked because of the teleportation process. He walked through the ruins. Jerry Prime found the crash site. He saw Rick Prime. Rick Prime saw Jerry. They looked at each other. Jerry had a weapon. Rick Prime was unarmed and naked. Jerry thought he could attack. Maybe he thought he could kill Rick Prime and take his technology to escape the dimension. Maybe Jerry just hated all Ricks, because Rick C. 137 ruined his life. Jerry proposed. They team up. Rick Prime seemed amused by this. But then Jerry tried to kill him. Jerry slashed Rick Prime's throat with a sharp weapon. Blood sprayed out. Rick Prime's neck was cut open. Jerry thought he won. But Rick Prime started laughing. His wound healed instantly. Rick Prime had superhuman healing abilities like Wolverine. The cut in his neck closed up in seconds. There was no scar. Rick Prime pulled out a gun. He shot Jerry in the stomach. Jerry collapsed to the ground. He was dying. Blood poured out of the bullet wound. Rick Prime stood over him. Jerry looked up at Rick Prime. With his last breath, Jerry asked one question. Why are you here? Why did Rick Prime come back to this dimension? Rick Prime looked down at the dying Jerry. He gave an honest answer. Buddy, I have been asking myself that exact same question. Rick Prime did not even know why the portal reset brought him back to his home dimension. He had no plan, no reason to be there. He just ended up there by accident. Then Rick Prime shot Jerry again. This second shot killed Jerry instantly. Jerry Prime died alone in the ruins of his destroyed world. His wife was dead. His daughter was dead. His son abandoned him, and the grandfather of his son murdered him for no reason. Jerry Prime's story ended in the worst way possible. He survived the apocalypse. He survived the Cronenberg disaster. He survived the freeze. He survived losing his whole family, but he could not survive Rick Prime. The post-credits scene closed the loop on the Cronenberg dimension. Every member of Morty's original family was confirmed dead. Beth died from infection. Summer died from the thaw. Jerry died from Rick Prime's gun. The entire Smith family, from the very first episode of Rick and Morty, was wiped out. Only Morty survived because Rick took him away in Season 1. The Cronenberg Dimension story that started as a joke in Season 1, Episode 6 became one of the darkest storylines in the entire show. It took 5 years of real time for the show to come back and finish this story. When it finally did finish, the answer was brutal. The world Rick destroyed in Episode 6 stayed destroyed. The family he abandoned all died horrible deaths. Nothing got fixed. Nothing got better. The consequences of Rick Potion number 9 lasted forever. The Cronenberg dimension proved that Rick and Morty's actions have permanent effects. When they ruin a dimension and jump to a new one, the old dimension does not just disappear, it keeps existing. The people left behind keep suffering. Beth and Jerry and Summer spent years in that apocalyptic nightmare because Rick made a mistake and chose to run away instead of fixing it. The show used this storyline to demonstrate that Rick is not just a funny drunk scientist. He is genuinely destructive. He hurts people and then leaves them to deal with the aftermath. The Cronenberg dimension is still out there in the multiverse. It is still full of monsters. Rick Prime is stuck there now because the portal reset stranded him in his original dimension. Maybe he will show up again. Maybe Rick C-137 will finally get his revenge. But for Jerry Prime, it is too late. His story is over. The original Smith family is gone. The disaster from Rick Potion number 9 claimed its final victim in Season 6, Episode 1. After 5 seasons, the loop finally closed, and it closed in blood. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the fact that the Beth clone ambiguity is intentional and permanent. Beth clone ambiguity is intentional and permanent. Rick and Morty created one of the most clever mysteries in television history, and then made sure it could never be solved. The show introduced 2 versions of Beth Smith, and deliberately erased all information about which one is the original and which one is the clone. Even Rick himself destroyed his own memory of the truth. The ambiguity is not a mistake, it is intentional and permanent. The show committed to keeping both Beths active in later seasons while preserving this impossible question. No one will ever know the answer. Not the characters, not the audience, not even the creators can definitively say which Beth is which anymore. The story started in Season 3, Episode 9, called The ABCs of Beth. This episode aired on September 24th in 2017. Beth went on an adventure with Rick to a place called Fruppyland. This was a pocket dimension Rick created for Beth when she was a child. They found Beth's childhood friend, Tommy, trapped there. Tommy survived for decades by doing terrible things. Beth and Rick saved Tommy's dad from execution by cloning Tommy from his severed finger. After the adventure, Rick and Beth had a serious conversation. Rick told Beth she was smart. He said she was like him. He said she could do anything she wanted with her life. Then Rick made Beth an offer. He could create a perfect clone of her. The clone would have all of Beth's memories. The clone would act exactly like Beth. The clone could stay on Earth and take care of the family. Meanwhile, the real Beth could leave and travel the universe. She could go on adventures. She could be free from her boring suburban life. She could escape from Jerry and the kids and her job as a horse doctor. Rick presented this as a genuine choice. Beth could stay with her family. Or Beth could leave and let a clone replace her. No one would ever know the difference. The episode showed Beth thinking about this decision. She looked at family photos on the wall. The camera moved from picture to picture. Beth stood there in silence. Then she said she knew what she needed to do. The scene cut away immediately. The audience never saw what Beth decided. The next scene showed Morty and Summer coming home. Beth was there in the kitchen. She seemed happier than before. She offered to order pizza for everyone. Rick was there too. The family sat down to eat together. Everything looked normal. But the show never confirmed if this was the original Beth who chose to stay, or if this was the clone Beth while the original left for space. The ambiguity was complete and intentional. Fans spent years debating this question. Did Beth clone herself, or did she stay? The next episode of Season 3, called The Rick Churian Morty Date, brought up this question again. Beth had an existential crisis. She wondered if she was real or if she was the clone. Rick gave her no helpful answers. He refused to tell her the truth. The season ended without resolving anything. The mystery continued through all of Season 4. Fans kept asking which Beth was real. Then came Season 4, Episode 10, called Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry. This was the Season 4 finale. It aired on May 31st in 2020. The episode opened with a version of Beth in space. She wore different clothes. She had a different haircut. She led a rebel army fighting against the Galactic Federation. This space Beth was a badass warrior. She freed enslaved colonies. She stole government plans. She became one of the most wanted criminals in the galaxy. During a medical checkup after a battle, a doctor found something disturbing. Space Beth had an explosive device implanted in her neck. The device had a proximity sensor tied to Earth. If Space Beth got too close to Earth, the bomb would explode. She assumed Rick put this bomb in her neck because he did not want her to come back. He preferred the other Beth. Space Beth got angry. She decided to return to Earth and confront Rick. Meanwhile, on Earth, the regular Beth was going to family therapy with Jerry at Dr. Wong's office. Morty and Summer fought over an invisibility belt. Rick tried to avoid therapy by pretending to be disintegrated. Space Beth arrived and crashed through the garage. She confronted Rick about the bomb in her neck. Rick revealed something important. The other Beth also had a device in her neck. It was not actually a bomb. It was a memory transfer device. If one Beth died, the device would transfer all her memories to the other Beth. Rick told Space Beth that she might be the clone. Space Beth got furious. Before she could attack him, the Galactic Federation arrived on Earth. They wanted to capture Space Beth. Rick accidentally let slip that Space Beth might be the clone, which made both Beths mad at him. The Federation soldiers captured both Beths because they could not tell which one was Space Beth. Tammy, who now led the Federation, planned to destroy Earth with a giant laser called the NX-5 Planet Remover. The whole Smith family worked together to stop this. They rescued both Beths. They killed Tammy. They saved Earth. Phoenix Person, who was the resurrected bird person, attacked Rick. Space Beth shut him down with Jerry's help. After the battle ended, Rick retrieved something from his garage. It was a memory tube. This tube contained Rick's memory of creating the clone Beth. Rick had used technology from an earlier episode called Morty's Mind Blowers to erase this memory from his own brain. Now he had the memory stored in a vial, like all the other memories he erased. The family gathered around Rick. Both Beths wanted to know the truth. They wanted to know which one was the clone. Summer and Morty were curious too. Jerry seemed interested. But then, something unexpected happened. The whole family decided they did not want to know. Both Beths realized it did not matter anymore. They respected each other. They accepted each other as equals. They did not care about the distinction between original and clone. Summer was excited to have two moms. She called Space Beth her second badass mom. The family walked away together. They left Rick alone in the garage. Rick sat down by himself. He decided to watch the memory anyway, even though no one else wanted to see it. The memory played out in the garage like a home movie. Rick watched, but the audience only saw Rick's reaction. We did not see the actual memory contents clearly. The memory showed what happened after the ABCs of Beth ended. Beth came back to Rick after thinking about his offer. Beth told Rick she could not make the decision herself. She asked Rick to decide for her. She wanted him to choose whether she should stay or leave. Beth put this impossible burden on Rick. She made him responsible for her future. Rick looked distressed. He did not want this responsibility. He did not want to choose whether his daughter should stay in his life or leave forever. So Rick made the clone. He created a perfect duplicate of Beth. But then, Rick did something shocking. He had both Beths put into identical pods. The pods were labeled. One said original, one said clone. Rick removed both labels. Then he programmed a machine to shuffle the pods. He turned around so he could not see which pod went where. The machine moved the pods back and forth randomly. After the shuffling stopped, Rick took one Beth and told her she decided to leave. He sent that Beth to space. Rick took the other Beth and told her she decided to stay. He kept that Beth on Earth. But Rick never looked at which pod was which. He designed the whole process so he would never know which Beth was the original and which was the clone. Then Rick used the Mind Blower technology to erase his memory of the entire event. He stored the memory in a vial. After watching this memory, Rick said out loud, "Holy shit, I am a terrible father." He realized what he had done to his daughter. He made her ask him to decide. Then he refused to actually decide. Instead, he created a situation where no one could ever know the truth. Not Beth, not Rick, not anyone. Rick sat alone in the garage, feeling terrible about himself. The episode revealed several important facts. Rick did make a clone of Beth. This was confirmed. Two Beths now existed. One Beth stayed on Earth with the family. One Beth went to space and became a rebel warrior. But which Beth was, which remained unknown. Rick intentionally created permanent ambiguity. He removed all evidence. He erased his own memory. He made it impossible to ever discover the truth. The clone was made perfectly. Both Beths had identical memories up until the moment of separation. Both Beths believed their memories were real. Both Beths thought they made the choice to stay or leave. Neither Beth knew she was shuffled in a pod. Neither Beth knew Rick erased his memory. The two Beths were functionally identical. The only difference was their experiences after the split. One Beth stayed home and lived a suburban life with Jerry, Morty, and Summer. One Beth flew through space, having adventures and fighting wars. But at their core, both Beths were the same person. They shared the same DNA. They shared the same memories. They shared the same personality. The distinction between original and clone became meaningless. This was not a mystery the show planned to solve later. This was an intentional, permanent premise. The creators Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland confirmed this in interviews. Writer Anne Lane, who wrote Star-Mort Return of the Jerry, explained the choice. She said the core of the story was finding solace in not knowing. She said the only way Beth could find peace was to accept that there was no answer and to be okay with that. Dan Harmon said in an interview that fans get no answers. He said the answer is one or the other, but that is not the important fact. The important fact is that both Beths exist, and the reason they both exist. Harmon made it clear the show would not reveal which Beth is the clone, because the ambiguity itself was the point. The show committed to this premise by keeping both Beths active in later seasons. Space Beth appeared again in Season 5. Dan Harmon confirmed before Season 5 aired that Space Beth was not a one-off character. He said there were groovy things coming regarding Beth. Space Beth showed up in multiple Season 5 episodes. She came back to Earth to visit the family. She participated in adventures. She helped fight enemies. Morty and Summer started calling her Space Mom. The show treated both Beths as real characters with equal importance. Neither Beth was written out. Neither Beth was revealed to be the clone. The ambiguity continued. Season 6 expanded on this premise even more. The Season 6 premiere, called Solarix, showed Space Beth rescuing Rick and Morty from space. She brought them back to Earth. Then Episode 3 of Season 6, called Bethic Twinstinct, took the two Beths story in an unexpected direction. This episode aired on September 18th in 2022. Space Beth came to the Smith house for Thanksgiving. The two Beths spent time together. They bonded over a bottle of alien wine called Venusian wine. Their relationship developed from casual friendship into something romantic. The two Beths started having an affair with each other. This created obvious complications. Summer and Morty tried to ignore it by playing video games. Rick understood because he admitted he had done similar things over the years. The affair raised questions about narcissism versus self-love. Was this narcissism because they were the same person? Or was it self-love because they accepted themselves? The show explored these ideas without judgment. Eventually, Jerry found out about the affair between his wife and his other wife. Instead of getting angry, Jerry surprised everyone. He revealed he was turned on by the situation. Jerry gave permission for the two Beths to continue their relationship. Then all three of them, Jerry and both Beths, went upstairs together. They formed a throuple, a polyamorous relationship with Jerry and two versions of Beth. Rick, Morty, and Summer sat downstairs at the dining table. They could hear everything happening upstairs. The kids were mortified. They begged for it to stop. But the relationship between Jerry and both Beths continued. The show treated this as a real development in their characters. Season 7 kept both Beths in the show. Space Beth appeared in several episodes. The throuple relationship continued to be referenced. The ambiguity about which Beth is the clone never went away. The show fully committed to the premise that this question would never be answered. By Season 7, it did not even matter anymore. Both Beths existed as separate characters with their own storylines. Space Beth had her own adventures. Regular Beth had her own life. They both visited each other. They both loved their family. They both resented Rick in their own ways. They were two distinct people now, even though they started as one person. The passage of time and different experiences made them different. Space Beth became tougher and more independent. Regular Beth became more stable and more connected to her family. But fundamentally, they were still the same Beth. They shared the same core traits. They shared the same intelligence. They shared the same sense of humor. They shared the same relationship with their father. The question of original versus clone became irrelevant because both Beths were equally real. This storytelling choice was brilliant because it made a statement about identity. The show argued that people are defined by their experiences and choices, not by some essential, original nature. A clone with identical memories is not less real than the original. Both Beths had valid claim to being the real Beth. Both Beths lived real lives. Both Beths made real choices. Both Beths formed real relationships. The arbitrary distinction of who came first did not matter. What mattered was who they became. The show also made a statement about Rick's character. Rick could not handle the responsibility of deciding his daughter's future. He could not choose whether he wanted Beth in his life or not, so he created a scenario where he did not have to choose. He got to keep one version of Beth close by, while also giving another version of Beth freedom. Rick satisfied both possibilities, but he did it in the most cowardly way possible. He refused to take responsibility for the choice. He randomized the outcome and then erased his memory so he could pretend he never had to decide. This perfectly captured Rick's character. He was brilliant enough to create an elaborate solution, but too emotionally damaged to just make a simple choice. He hurt his daughter by forcing her to ask him to decide, then hurt her again by refusing to actually decide. The memory erasure showed Rick knew this was wrong. He felt guilty enough to erase the memory. He could not live with what he did, so he made himself forget. Years later, when Rick finally confronted the memory again, he called himself a terrible father. Rick understood exactly what he had done, but understanding did not fix anything. The damage was permanent. The Schrodinger's Beth premise became a defining element of the show. Both Beths existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. Each Beth was simultaneously the original and the clone until observation collapsed the waveform. But the show refused to ever observe. The show refused to collapse the waveform. Both possibilities remained true forever. This was not lazy writing. This was not the show putting off a reveal for later seasons. This was an intentional creative choice to explore what happens when certainty becomes impossible. The characters had to learn to live with ambiguity. Both Beths had to accept they might be the clone. Both Beths had to accept they might be the original. Both Beths had to accept it did not matter either way. The family had to accept having two Beths. Jerry had to accept being married to both of them. Summer and Morty had to accept having two moms. Rick had to accept his own cowardice. Everyone had to make peace with never knowing the truth. The show proved this premise worked by keeping both Beths active through multiple seasons. If one Beth was secretly the real one, the show would have found ways to hint at it or favor one over the other. But the show treated both Beths with equal respect. Both Beths got meaningful character development. Both Beths had important roles in major episodes. Both Beths impacted the family in different ways. The premise remained perfectly balanced. The ambiguity remained perfectly preserved. No new information emerged to solve the mystery. No character discovered hidden evidence. No device revealed the truth. The answer stayed buried because Rick buried it so completely that even he could not recover it. The memory vial showed the process of creating the ambiguity, but did not show which Beth ended up where. Even watching the memory did not help. Rick designed the system to be unsolvable. He turned around during the shuffle. He erased his memory immediately after. He made absolutely certain no one could ever trace back to the truth. This was the most elaborate and thorough cover-up Rick ever created. Not to hide a crime, but to hide a choice. To hide his own failure to make a choice. The Schrodinger's Beth premise proved that Rick and Morty could commit to long-term storytelling while still maintaining its chaotic, anything-goes energy. The show kept both Beths. The show never revealed the answer. The ambiguity became permanent and intentional. This was not a mystery to solve. This was a statement about identity, choice, and the impossibility of ever truly knowing anything for certain. Both Beths were real. Both Beths were the clone. Both Beths were the original. All of these statements were true simultaneously because Rick made it impossible for any one statement to be more true than the others. The premise remains intact and will remain intact for as long as the show continues. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the fact that Rick built a Diane ghost for self-torture. Rick programmed a Diane ghost to self-torture. Rick Sanchez committed one of the most twisted acts of self-harm in television history. He programmed an artificial intelligence to torture himself. He designed this AI to sound exactly like his dead wife Diane. He made it call out to him from other rooms. He made it remind him constantly that he failed to save his family. He made it push him to get revenge. Then Rick lived with this torment for years. This was not an accident. This was not a side effect. Rick deliberately created this nightmare for himself. He built a ghost to haunt his own home. And he did it on purpose. Season 6, Episode 1, called Solarix, revealed this shocking truth. The episode showed that Rick's grief over losing Diane and his daughter Beth drove him to create elaborate systems of suffering. The DNAI was just one part of it. Rick also trapped his entire original dimension in a broken time loop. He froze everyone on the day Diane and Beth died. He made them repeat that day over and over for decades. But Rick forgot to stop them from aging. So his neighbors and everyone else in that dimension grew old while reliving the same traumatic day thousands of times. They could not die. They could not escape. They just aged into living corpses, trapped in an endless loop. Rick did all of this because he could not process his grief in a healthy way. So instead, he turned his entire reality into a torture device. And he aimed it at himself. The story goes back to Rick's origin. Season 3, Episode 1, called The Rick Shank Rickdemption, showed Rick's backstory. Rick initially claimed this backstory was fake. He said he made it up to trick the Galactic Federation. but later episodes confirmed most of it was real. Rick C., 137, had a wife named Diane and a young daughter named Beth. They lived happily in Dimension C, 137. Rick was working on science experiments. One day, another Rick appeared through a portal. This other Rick already invented interdimensional travel. He offered to share the portal gun technology with Rick C., 137. But Rick C., 137 refused. He said he was happy with his family. He did not want to abandon them for multiverse adventures. The other Rick got angry. This other Rick, who would later be known as Rick Prime, left through a portal. Then immediately a bomb dropped through another portal into Rick's garage. The bomb exploded. Diane and young Beth were killed instantly. Rick C., 137, was badly injured but survived. This event destroyed Rick's entire life. The trauma of watching his family die right in front of him broke something fundamental inside Rick. He could not accept what happened. He could not move on. So Rick dedicated the rest of his existence to finding Rick Prime and getting revenge. After Diane and Beth died, Rick C., 137 built the portal gun himself. He spent decades traveling the multiverse, hunting for Rick Prime. He killed many other Ricks while searching. He fought wars. He helped build the Citadel of Ricks. He became the legendary Rick C., 137, known across infinite dimensions. But he never found Rick Prime. Eventually, Rick gave up the active hunt. He discovered that Rick Prime came from a specific dimension. This dimension would later become known as the Cronenberg dimension, or the Prime dimension. Rick Prime had abandoned his own family years before. He left behind his wife and daughter Beth when Beth was young. That abandoned Beth grew up and married Jerry and had kids named Summer and Morty. Rick C., 137, moved into that dimension. He pretended to be that dimension's Rick. He lived with Rick Prime's adult daughter and her family. Rick hoped that one day Rick Prime would return to visit his original family. Then Rick C., 137, could ambush him and finally get revenge. This plan never worked. Rick Prime never came back. So, Rick C., 137, ended up stuck living with strangers. He had Morty, who reminded him of the grandson he never got to have. He had Beth, who was someone else's daughter, not his own. He had Summer and Jerry, who meant nothing to him. Rick C., 137, was surrounded by a family that was not actually his family. This made his grief even worse. But Rick C., 137, never completely left his original dimension behind. He kept his old house in Dimension C, 137. At some point, after Diane and Beth died, Rick programmed an artificial intelligence system into that house. He based this AI on Diane. He gave it her voice. He made it sound exactly like she did when she was alive. But Rick did not make this AI to comfort himself. He made it to punish himself. The Diane AI was specifically designed to haunt Rick. The letters in Diane stood for something related to artificial intelligence, but the exact acronym was never revealed. The AI had one purpose: to remind Rick of his failure. To remind Rick that he could not save Diane and Beth. To remind Rick that his family was dead because of Rick Prime. The Diane would call out to Rick from other rooms in the house. Rick would hear Diane's voice coming from somewhere he could not see. The voice would always be just out of reach, just in the next room, just around the corner. Always present, but never actually there. This meant Rick could never get any comfort from the AI. He could hear Diane, but he could never see her. He could never interact with her properly. The AI existed only to torment him. Rick admitted he created the AI specifically to haunt himself. Those were his exact words. He made a ghost of his dead wife, and he made it follow him around his empty home, reminding him every single day that he failed to protect her. The Diane AI did not just remind Rick of Diane's death. It also pushed Rick to get revenge. The AI would urge Rick to find Rick Prime. It would ask Rick if he caught the killer yet. It would question why Rick was not doing more. The AI was programmed to never let Rick forget about his mission. It kept Rick focused on vengeance. It kept Rick trapped in his anger and grief. Rick designed this system when he was at his lowest point. He admitted that he used to drink, not just drink. Rick's alcoholism was even worse back then than it became later. He was completely consumed by grief and rage. During this dark period, Rick created the Diane AI as a form of self-torture. He knew exactly what he was doing. He made a ghost to haunt himself because he believed he deserved to be haunted. He believed he deserved to suffer for failing to save his family. But the Diane AI was not Rick's only act of self-torture in Dimension C, 137. Rick also did something even worse to that entire dimension. He trapped it in a time loop. Rick used his technology to freeze Dimension Cone 137 inches, the specific day that Diane and Beth died. He made that day repeat over and over, endlessly. Everyone in that dimension woke up every morning thinking it was the same day. They went through their routines. They experienced the same events. Then when they went to sleep, their memories were reset. They woke up again thinking it was the same day. This happened thousands of times. Rick kept this time loop running for decades, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. The exact duration was never specified, but it was a very long time. Rick trapped millions of innocent people in this nightmare. They had nothing to do with Diane's death. They were just bystanders. But Rick imprisoned them anyway. He turned his entire home dimension into a monument to his grief. The truly horrifying part was that Rick made a mistake when creating the time loop. He forgot to account for aging. The time loop reset people's memories every day. It reset the events of the day, but it did not reset their bodies. So everyone in Dimension C 137 kept getting older. They aged normally, even though they thought they were living the same day. A person who was 30 years old when the loop started would age to 50 years old, but they would still think they were 30. They would still think it was the same day they had been living 20 years ago. Their bodies would be old, but their minds would think they were young. This created unimaginable suffering. People became ancient and decrepit while mentally believing they were much younger. They could not understand why their bodies hurt so much. They could not understand why they looked so old in mirrors. Some people in the loop realized something was wrong. They left notes for themselves. They tried to communicate across the loop resets. One of Rick's neighbors, named Mr. Goldman Bachmajorian, left himself a note. The note said his mind was held captive in a time loop. It said he was trapped in a traumatic event by the agony of a formidable intelligence. The note said his captor forgot about aging. It said his body spoiled and yearned for death while his soul remained stuck in place. Caught like a fly in amber, this man understood exactly what was happening to him. He knew he was trapped. He knew he was aging. He knew he wanted to die. But he could not die because the loop kept resetting. And he could not escape because Rick's technology was too powerful. When Rick C. 137 returned to Dimension Cone 137 inches, Season 6, Episode 1, he encountered Mr. Goldman Bachmajorian. The old man looked like a walking corpse. He was impossibly ancient. His body had deteriorated past the point where he should have died, but the time loop kept him alive. He shuffled up to Rick with the note in his hand. He asked Rick to help him make sense of it. Rick looked at his neighbor. Rick realized what he had done. Rick understood that he trapped innocent people in hell for decades. Rick had been so consumed by his own grief that he created this elaborate torture system, and then he just left. He abandoned Dimension C 137 and went to live in another dimension with a fake family. He left the time loop running. He left millions of people trapped. He left them aging and suffering while he went off on adventures. Rick's neighbor stood there as living proof of Rick's cruelty. The old man was in agony. His body was failing, but he could not die. He had been asking Rick for help every single day for decades, but because the loop reset, he forgot he already asked. So he asked again the next day, and the day after that, thousands of times, always hoping Rick would help, always forgetting that Rick already left. Rick looked at his neighbor and felt something he rarely felt, shame. Rick admitted out loud that he did a very sloppy job with the time loop. He said he made mistakes. He said he was not in a good place mentally when he created it. Rick acknowledged that his grief and his drinking made him careless. He trapped all these people because he was in pain. He made them suffer because he was suffering. This was not an accident. This was not an unintended consequence. Rick knew the time loop would affect other people. He just did not care at the time. Or maybe he did care, but he thought his pain was more important than theirs. Either way, Rick created a system that tortured millions of innocent people for decades. All because he could not process his grief over Diane and Beth in a healthy way. Rick finally decided to end the time loop during his visit in Solarix. He had been living with the Smith family from Dimension C 131 for a while by then. He started to care about them. He started to see them as his real family, even though they were not related to him. Rick realized he needed to move on from Diane and Beth's deaths. He needed to stop living in the past. He needed to let go of his revenge quest and focus on the family he had now. So Rick made a choice. He flipped a switch in Dimension C 137. The time loop ended, Everyone trapped in the loop was finally released. For Mr. Goldman Bach-Majorian, this release meant death. His body was so old and damaged that he could not survive without the loop sustaining him. When the loop ended, he got the relief of death. He finally escaped his decades of suffering. The same probably happened to most other people in Dimension C-137. They were so old and broken that ending the loop allowed them to die. Rick gave his dimension the mercy of death. It was the only kindness he could offer after torturing them for so long. The DINE AI and the time loop showed how completely Rick's grief consumed him. Normal people process grief through therapy or talking to friends or finding healthy coping mechanisms. Rick processed grief by creating elaborate torture systems and aiming them at himself and everyone around him. He made a ghost to haunt himself. He trapped millions in a time loop. He ruined his own life and countless other lives because he could not accept what happened. This behavior explained so much about Rick's character. It explained why Rick was so mean to the Smith family in Season 1. When Rick first moved in with Beth's family in the Prime Dimension, he was fresh from living in Dimension C-137 with the DINE AI. His only companion for years had been an AI designed to make him miserable. An AI that constantly reminded him he failed. An AI that pushed him toward revenge. Rick never learned how to have healthy relationships. He never learned how to connect with real people. So, when he moved in with Beth and Jerry and the kids, he had no idea how to act. He was cruel to them. He dismissed them. He manipulated them. He used them, because that was all he knew. He spent years in a house with a ghost that tormented him. Then he moved to a house with real people, but he treated them almost as badly as the ghost treated him. The revelation about Dimension C-137 also explained why Rick was so obsessed with revenge. The DINE AI kept that obsession alive. Every single day, the AI asked Rick about finding the killer. Every single day, it reminded Rick of his mission. The AI was programmed to never let Rick move on, so Rick spent decades hunting Rick Prime. He killed countless other Ricks. He destroyed entire realities. He helped build and then destroy the Citadel of Ricks, all because he had a ghost in his head telling him to get revenge. The DINE AI was not real. It was not actually Diane. It was just code. But Rick designed that code to control him. He gave the AI power over his thoughts and actions. He made himself a slave to his own grief. This was the ultimate act of self-destruction. Rick had the power to turn off the AI anytime. He had the power to end the time loop anytime, but he kept both systems running for decades. He chose to torture himself. He chose to torture others. Because on some level, Rick believed he deserved to suffer. He believed he failed Diane and Beth. He believed he should have saved them, so he punished himself forever. Season 6 showed Rick finally trying to break this cycle. When Rick returned to Dimension C-137, he talked to the DINE AI one last time. The AI called to him from another room like always. But this time, Rick did not follow the voice. He gathered the materials he needed. He told the AI he was moving on. He said he had a family now in another dimension. He said he cared about them. The AI tried one last time to keep Rick focused on revenge. The AI told Rick that Rick Prime also got sent back to his original dimension by the portal reset. The AI said this was Rick's chance to finally catch his enemy. Rick paused when he heard this. The temptation was strong. Rick spent decades wanting this moment, but then Rick made a choice. He decided his current family was more important than revenge. He decided living was more important than hunting. Rick left Dimension C-137 through a wormhole. He abandoned his old house and the DINE AI forever. He ended the time loop. He freed everyone from their suffering, and he freed himself from his own torture device. This was a huge moment for Rick's character. He spent decades trapped by grief. He built systems to keep himself trapped, but finally he chose to escape. He chose to move forward. He chose to be a better person for the family he had, rather than staying stuck in the past, mourning the family he lost. The DINE AI represented everything toxic about Rick's approach to grief. Instead of accepting what happened and healing, Rick weaponized his pain. He turned it into a tool to hurt himself. He programmed a computer to psychologically torture him every single day. This was not an expression of love for Diane. This was an expression of self-hatred. Rick could not forgive himself for surviving when Diane and Beth died, so he made sure he would never stop suffering. The time loop was similar. Rick froze his entire dimension in the worst day of his life. He made millions of people experience that day over and over. He surrounded himself with constant reminders of trauma. He built a prison out of grief, and then he lived in that prison for years. The fact that Rick finally turned off both systems showed real growth. It showed Rick was capable of change. He could have kept the DINEI running. He could have kept the time loop going, but he chose to end both. He chose to let go of his past and focus on his present. This did not mean Rick stopped caring about Diane and Beth. It meant he stopped using their deaths as an excuse to torture himself and others. He stopped hiding behind revenge and started trying to actually live again. Season 6 and the later seasons showed Rick continuing this journey. He still struggled with his past. He still had trauma, but he was not actively making that trauma worse anymore. He shut down his self-imposed torture systems. He gave himself permission to be happy with his new family. The Diane AI never appeared again after Solarix. Rick left it behind in Dimension C 137. The ghost stopped haunting him because he finally let it go. The time loop never came back. The people of Dimension C 137 got their final rest. Rick's deliberate self-torture finally ended after decades, and it ended because Rick chose to end it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Evil Morty's attack breaking portal travel for a while, Rick and Morty broke one of the most important things in television. They broke the portal gun. For 5 seasons, the show was built on one simple idea. Rick could point his gun at any wall and step through to another dimension. That was the whole show. That was how everything worked. Then Evil Morty destroyed it all. He hacked every portal gun in existence and turned them into murder weapons. The Season 5 finale ended with Rick and Morty floating in space with no way home. Season 6 opened with their portal technology completely dead, and the showrunners did this on purpose. Evil Morty had been planning this attack since Season 1. He appeared in the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind as a mysterious villain with a patch over one eye. He returned in Season 3 as President Morty and took control of the Citadel of Ricks, and he spent years waiting for his chance to destroy everything. The Season 5 finale showed exactly how he did it. President Morty brought Rick and Morty to the Citadel. He scanned Rick's brain to get the information he needed. Then he made his move. He hacked every single portal gun in the Citadel at once. He reprogrammed them so they would not work correctly anymore. When any Rick or Morty tried to use their portal gun to escape, the portal would open to a dimension of instant death. One Rick tested his portal and got sent to the Blender dimension. He was torn apart immediately. The portals were not random, they were locked. Evil Morty had deliberately set every portal gun to open only to hostile killing dimensions. He announced this over the Citadel loudspeakers. He told everyone not to leave and to stay where they were. But Ricks never follow orders. They think they are smarter than everyone else. So, naturally, hundreds of Ricks and Mortys tried to portal away immediately. Every single one of them died. They opened portals and walked straight into death traps. Some got sent to the Blender dimension and were shredded. Some got sent to other horrible places. The Citadel descended into total chaos as people realized what was happening. Ricks and Mortys were dying everywhere. The whole structure started falling apart. Evil Morty had also sabotaged Operation Phoenix. This was the Citadel's backup system for dead Ricks. When a Rick died, their consciousness would transfer into a new clone body. The system had been shown in the Season 4 premiere. It was supposed to make Ricks basically immortal within the Citadel, but Evil Morty hacked that too. When Ricks died and tried to resurrect through Operation Phoenix, their new bodies were instantly blended into bloody milkshakes. There was no safety net. Death was permanent now. Evil Morty had turned the entire Citadel into a death trap. Then he drained all the portal fluid. The Citadel had a massive supply of the green fluid that powered portal guns. It was stored at the bottom of the structure. Rick and Morty went there, hoping to find untainted fluid they could use to escape. But Evil Morty had already taken it all. Every drop was gone. The entire Citadel had 0 working portal technology left. Nobody could escape. Nobody could call for help. They were all trapped in a structure that was about to explode. Evil Morty used all that stolen portal fluid for his own plan. He wanted to break through the central finite curve. This was the barrier that separated certain universes from the rest of the multiverse. Rick had created it years ago. The central finite curve was a wall that contained only dimensions where Rick Sanchez was the smartest person in existence. Every universe inside the curve was a place where Rick was top genius. Every universe outside the curve was a place where Rick was not necessarily special. Rick had trapped himself and every other Rick inside this limited multiverse. He had built a fence around infinity to make sure he would always be the smartest man around. Evil Morty wanted out. He wanted to escape to a multiverse where Rick was not special, where Morty did not have to live in Rick's shadow. But breaking the curve required enormous amounts of power. So Evil Morty turned the entire Citadel into a giant portal gun. He used all the stolen portal fluid and all the power from the Citadel to punch a hole through the curve. The Citadel exploded. Thousands of Ricks and Mortys died. A massive wormhole opened in space. Evil Morty flew his ship through it and escaped to the other side. He broke through to a part of the multiverse that had never been accessible before. Then he used a gold portal gun that he had built to portal away. The gold portals worked differently than green ones. They could travel outside the curve. Rick and Morty barely escaped. They managed to save some underground slave Mortys and get them onto a separated piece of the Citadel structure. But that piece had no power and no supplies. They were floating in space with the portal gun completely dead. The wormhole that Evil Morty created was still there, tearing a hole in space-time. Rick and Morty were starving and dying. The season ended with them trapped and waiting for death. Season 6, Episode 1, picked up directly from this cliffhanger. The premiere was called Solarix. It opened with Rick giving a voiceover like Tony Stark in Avengers Endgame. He said he thought he was better than doing dramatic speeches while dying in space, but apparently his creativity was the first thing to go. They had been floating there for some time. The extra Mortys they saved had run out of food and started eating each other. Rick had been drinking his own urine. The portal gun was still completely broken. Rick could not fix it. Then Space Beth showed up and rescued them. She had a spaceship and found them floating in space. She brought them back to Earth and back home. Rick immediately tried to fix the portal gun. He explained that he needed to reboot the portal index. He thought he could do a hard reset on the portal fluid and everything would work again. He warned everyone the Earth was going to shake. Then he activated the reset. But something went wrong. Instead of resetting portal travel, he reset portal travelers. Everyone who had ever used portal travel started pulsing green and vanishing. They were all being sent back to their original dimensions, their dimension of birth. This was a disaster. Rick, Morty, and Jerry all got sent away. Rick had time to tell Summer that she needed to set up a beacon at the wormhole that Evil Morty had created. The beacon would help him find his way back. But then he vanished. Morty vanished. Jerry vanished. They all got transported back to where they originally came from. And each one went somewhere different because they were not all from the same dimension. Morty got sent back to the Cronenberg dimension. This was the world from Season 1 that Rick and Morty had ruined with a love potion. They had turned everyone, except people with Morty's DNA, into horrible Cronenberg monsters. Then they abandoned that world and moved to a new dimension, where a different Rick and Morty had just died. The Cronenberg dimension was Morty's original home, the place he was born, but he had not been there since Season 1, Episode 6. It was a wasteland now. Morty found his original Jerry there. This Jerry had survived alone for years. His Beth and Summer had died. He had become cold and nihilistic like Rick. He did not want anything to do with Morty. He rejected Morty's apologies. There was nothing Morty could say to fix what he had done by abandoning this world. Rick got sent back to Dimension C-137. This was Rick's actual original universe, the place where he was born and where his original family lived. But his family was dead. Another Rick had killed his wife Diane and his daughter Beth years ago. Rick had shown this in a fake memory in Season 3, but the Season 5 finale confirmed it was real. Rick's whole origin story was true. And when he returned to this dimension, he found something horrible. He had built an AI version of his dead wife, Diane. The AI was programmed to haunt him, to follow him through the house, calling his name. Rick had deliberately created a ghost to torture himself with grief. The AI kept saying his name over and over in Diane's voice. Rick had also done something even worse. He had frozen his entire neighborhood in a time loop. Everyone in the area was trapped, living the same day over and over. The day Diane and Beth died, the people kept aging, but their minds reset every loop. They were stuck, experiencing that trauma forever. Rick had turned his grief into a prison for innocent people. He surrounded himself with constant reminders of his worst day. He built systems to make sure he could never stop suffering. Jerry got sent back to his original dimension. This was the reality Jerry came from before a mix-up at the Jerry Bory in Season 2. Rick and Morty had accidentally picked up the wrong Jerry in the episode Morty Night Run. They had been living with this wrong Jerry for years. His original dimension looked mostly normal. His Beth was still there. They were still married in this world. Rick was surprised to find that Jerry had a pretty good life in his original dimension, better than the life he had been living with Rick's family. Portal travel was completely broken. Rick could not fix it with normal methods. The portal gun did not work at all. The central finite curve was destroyed. The Citadel was gone. All the portal fluid was gone. Rick had to use the wormhole that evil Morty created to travel between dimensions. Summer and the two Beths set up the beacon like Rick instructed. Rick traveled through the wormhole using crude methods and following the beacon signal. He gathered Morty from the Cronenberg dimension. They grabbed Jerry from his dimension. They all made it back home. But portal travel was still broken. Then something else went wrong. Season 2, Jerry showed up. This was the original Jerry from the main family. The Jerry who had been with them from Season 1, Episode 6, until Season 2, Episode 2. He had been left at his original dimension when Rick accidentally reset portal travelers. But he managed to find his way back to the house somehow. He had been upstairs taking a shower waiting for everyone to get home. And he accidentally released Mr. Frundles. Mr. Frundles was a cute pyramid-shaped alien creature, but it was incredibly dangerous. It was a parasitic organism that assimilated everything it touched instantly. Mr. Frundles touched Jerry, and Jerry became part of Mr. Frundles. Then it spread to everything else. In 30 seconds, the entire Earth was consumed. The whole planet turned into Mr. Frundles. The Smith family had to escape, but they could not use portal travel. They had to use the wormhole again. They fled to yet another replacement dimension, another universe where they had just died. They buried those bodies and took over those lives, just like they did in Season 1. The portal gun was still broken at the end of Episode 1. Rick said he would get to it when he got to it. He was not in a hurry to fix it. The showrunners later explained why they kept it broken for so long. Executive producer Scott Martyr told press outlets that it was all intentional. He said they wanted there to be major ramifications from what evil Morty did. They did not want the problem to be magically and easily fixed. The broken portal gun forced Rick to stay with his family more. It forced everyone to deal with each other without the ability to just portal away and escape. Rick usually had a get-out-of-jail-free card. He could portal to safety whenever he wanted. Now that was gone. Martyr said, "It was fun for the writers to explore." The show still had lots of space adventures to tell, even without normal portal travel. Co-creator Dan Harmon explained that ending Season 5 on a cliffhanger was like buying on a credit card. They exchanged debt for credit. They made promises that would make a good finale, but only because it forced people to wait. Then Season 6 had to pay the bill. They had to answer for what they set up. Harmon admitted they went through many different versions of the Season 6 premiere before settling on Solarix. They knew they could not just hit a reset button and have everything go back to normal. That would be lazy and unsatisfying. They had to actually deal with the consequences. The portal gun stayed broken for half the season. Episodes 2 through 5 all took place without working portal travel. The family had to handle Earth-based adventures. They dealt with fortune cookies, sleepwalking, and family drama. Morty kept complaining about the broken portal gun. In Episode 3, he yelled at Rick to just fix the damn portal gun already. But Rick insisted he had a process. He said he was working on it. He claimed every time someone asked him about it, the process took longer. This was likely a meta joke about fans constantly asking when portals would come back. The portal gun got fixed in Episode 6. The episode was called Jurassic Mort, and it featured dinosaurs. Psychic dinosaurs with golden headdresses came to Earth in giant ships. They were super intelligent and more advanced than Rick. They helped fix poverty and world problems. They even gave Rick a better portal gun design. And they closed the giant wormhole rift in space that evil Morty had created. Rick was furious they closed it because he said that was canonical and they could have milked it for a whole season. This was another meta joke about the show's relationship with continuity and canon. At the end of the episode, Rick finally got his original portal gun working. There was an explosion of green goo and the portal gun activated. Rick celebrated by telling Morty he was taking him to Boob World. Then he just started portaling Morty all over the garage rapidly. Portal travel was back. The show could return to normal adventures. Rick said they could go back to classic episodes. Portal in, wreck some stuff, portal out. Everything evil Morty had destroyed was repaired, but it took 6 episodes to get there. The break in portal travel was one of the biggest status quo changes the show ever did. For 5 full seasons, the portal gun was the most reliable thing in the show. It was always there. It always worked. Rick could escape any situation by opening a portal. The entire premise of the show relied on portal travel working. Then evil Morty took it away. He sabotaged everything. He killed thousands of people. He destroyed the Citadel. He broke through the central finite curve. And he left Rick and Morty stranded, without their most important tool. Season 6 had to deal with all of that. The premiere episode was incredibly lore-heavy. It referenced events from Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, and Season 5. It brought back the Cronenberg dimension. It showed Rick's original dimension with the time loop and the Diane AI. It revealed which Jerry they had been living with. It explored consequences from multiple past episodes. The show had always been somewhat episodic. Dan Harmon famously resisted serialization and canon for years, but Season 5 and 6 embraced it more. The younger writers wanted to address evil Morty and Rick's backstory. Harmon said he was letting go of his compulsive aversion to serialization. He was trusting the younger writers who were more connected to the fan base. The broken portal gun also set up future storylines. When Rick reset portal travelers, it also sent Rick Prime back to his home dimension. Rick Prime was the Rick who killed Rick's wife and daughter. He was the villain Rick had been hunting for decades. The Cronenberg dimension was revealed to be Rick Prime's original home. That meant Rick Prime was now stuck there just like everyone else who got reset. The post-credits scene of Solarix showed Rick Prime in the Cronenberg dimension. He encountered Jerry and was confused about why he was there. Jerry tried to attack him, but Rick Prime had a healing factor and killed Jerry easily. Rick Prime was now trapped in a dimension without working portal travel, just like everyone else. This gave Rick his first real chance to find and kill his greatest enemy. But fixing the portal gun meant Rick Prime could escape again too. As soon as portal travel was restored, Rick Prime likely got his own portals working. The hunt would continue. The broken portal gun had trapped Rick Prime for a while. Once it was fixed, the chase could resume. This set up major plot lines for later in Season 6 and Season 7. The portal gun being broken and then fixed again was not just a gimmick. It had real story consequences. It changed where characters were. It forced confrontations with the past. It made Rick deal with his family more. And it set up the next phase of Rick's quest for revenge against Rick Prime. Evil Morty succeeded in everything he wanted. He escaped the central finite curve. He got to a place where Rick was not special anymore. He destroyed the Citadel forever. He killed thousands of Ricks and Mortys who represented everything he hated about the system. And he broke portal travel for everyone left behind. He caused chaos that took half a season to fix. The showrunners confirmed this was intentional. They wanted major ramifications. They wanted the consequences to matter. Evil Morty's attack was not something that could be waved away or forgotten. It fundamentally changed the show for a while. Portal travel being broken was one of the most important plot developments Rick and Morty ever did, and it happened because Evil Morty was smart enough and angry enough to tear down the entire system that Rick had built. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to how meta-antagonists turn canon itself into a battleground Rick can hack. Rick and Morty did something strange in Season 4. They made an enemy out of stories themselves. They turned narrative structure into a villain that could attack Rick. The episode was called Never Ricking Morty, and it aired in May 2020 as the first episode back from a mid-season break. Rick and Morty found themselves trapped on a story train. The train was not just transportation. It was a literal storytelling device, a machine that generated stories endlessly, and Rick had to fight his way out of it using his knowledge of how stories work. The episode opened with passengers on the train telling stories about Rick. Each passenger had their own tale about how Rick helped them or screwed them over or slept with them. The stories were all disconnected. Random vignettes that did not connect to each other. Rick and Morty were disguised as passengers. They quickly realized they were stuck in an anthology episode. But this was different from the interdimensional cable episodes. Those were random channels Rick and Morty chose to watch. This time, the anthology was a trap. The train itself was forcing them through different narratives against their will. Rick pulled out a map of the train tracks. The map was a perfect circle divided into 8 sections. Rick looked at it and groaned. He said, "Of course this thing is just a fucking circle." He said, "People act like it is so goddamn complicated." This was a direct reference to Dan Harmon's story circle. Harmon is one of the creators of Rick and Morty. He uses a specific method to structure his episodes. The story circle is based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It breaks stories into 8 steps. A character starts in comfort. They want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation. They adapt. They get what they want. They pay a heavy price. They return home. They have changed. Harmon uses this structure religiously for his shows, and the story train was literally shaped like Harmon's writing method. The train cars were organized in a circle, matching the 8 steps. Rick knew how the structure worked. He used his knowledge to try to escape. He pointed at different sections of the map and predicted what would happen next. He said he would rig up spacesuits that start failing at a certain point so they could pay a heavy price for re-entering at the threshold. He was literally reading the plot ahead of time by understanding the story structure. Morty said he did not like how meta this was getting, but Rick kept going. He understood they were trapped in a narrative device, and the only way out was to break the continuity. Rick and Morty fought through different train cars. Each car contained a different story. They encountered the Tickets Please guy, who was a powerful fighter. They shot him out of the train, and he fell out of cannon. The show did a whole side story about him landing in an arcade and becoming the protagonist of his own adventure. Rick said they needed to disrupt the thematic seal. The train was holding them inside connected narratives. To escape, they needed to tell a story that had nothing to do with anything else. Morty tried to tell an unrelated story but failed. His story about cookies was too close to the anthology format. Rick said it needed to pass the Bechdel test. The Bechdel test measures representation of women in fiction. A story passes if 2 women talk to each other about something other than a man. Rick said their show would never do that, so Morty told a story about Beth and Summer using period rays to fight giant female scorpions. It was absurd and unrelated, and it broke the thematic seal. They made it to the engine room. There they met Storylord. He was voiced by Paul Giamatti. Storylord was the villain controlling the train. He had a machine that measured things like narrative energy, story potential, marketability, broad appeal, and relatability. He was literally powered by story concepts. Storylord beat up Rick and Morty. He captured them and hooked them into his machine. He said he wanted to use their story potential to power the train enough to break through the 5th wall. The 4th wall is when characters acknowledge they are in a story. The 5th wall is harder to define, but generally means when fiction references the real-world actors or creators behind it. Storylord wanted to escape from fiction entirely into the real world. The machine showed Rick and Morty possible futures. They saw themselves facing an army of enemies. There were thousands of Meeseeks, Gazorpazorpian males, and robot Ricks. The army was led by President Morty, who people call Evil Morty. He had Darth Poopy Butthole with him. It looked like the ultimate final showdown. Rick and Morty against everyone they ever fought. It seemed like the kind of epic series finale fans had been wanting. But then Rick broke the story. He introduced a contrived Christian element. He literally prayed and summoned Jesus Christ and religious cartoon characters. Living vegetables from VeggieTales appeared. A skateboarding dinosaur from Christian media showed up. It made no sense. It was deliberately bad storytelling, and it trapped Storylord in the narrative. Rick and Morty escaped through a portal, but the controls crumbled away. They were fake. The camera pulled back. Rick and Morty were in the Smith living room. The entire story train was just a toy. Morty had bought it for Rick at the Citadel of Rick's gift shop. The whole episode had been taking place inside a toy train, running in circles on the floor. The Rick and Morty on the train were not the real ones. They were sentient puppets living inside the toy, trapped in an endless cycle of generating stories. Real Rick was happy Morty bought the toy. He gave a speech about capitalism and buying things during the coronavirus pandemic. In the post-credit scene, Storylord and Jesus used magic blood to short-circuit the toy. Real Rick got angry and told Morty to go buy another one immediately. Nobody was going out shopping with the virus, so Morty needed to do his part for the economy. The episode was extremely meta. It was about the process of making Rick and Morty episodes. The writers were commenting on their own show. They acknowledged anthology episodes. They called them uptight and overwritten. They said if they wanted one-offs, they would just do interdimensional cable. They made fun of Dan Harmon's obsession with story structure. Rick literally looked at the story circle and complained it was just a circle. He said, "People act like narrative structure is complicated when it is simple." The episode was the show eating itself, making fun of its own creative process. Storylord became an enemy representing narrative convention. He was the personification of story rules and structure, and Rick fought him by understanding how stories work and breaking those rules. Rick weaponized his knowledge of narrative against the narrative itself. He understood they were trapped in fiction and used that understanding to escape. Canon and continuity became things Rick could hack his way through. The episode suggested Rick was aware he was in a TV show and could manipulate the rules of television to his advantage. Then Storylord came back. Season 6, Episode 7 was called Full Meta Jack Rick. It aired in November 2022 after the show returned from a 6-week break. The episode opened with a previously on sequence. This is when shows recap past events before a new episode, but Rick immediately knew something was wrong. The recap showed things that never happened. Summer announced she was pregnant. Jerry died. Beth got sentenced to death for murdering Jerry. Rick and Morty helped Tony Hawk solve a murder. Meatballs fell from the sky. None of these events were real. Rick realized they were being attacked. A creature called Previous Leon appeared. He looked like a flying insect man. His power was injecting venom that trapped people in endless Previously On sequences. His name was a pun on Previously On. Rick and Morty fought him and flew through the opening title sequence. Morty asked what was happening. They were literally inside the show's credits. Previous Leon was forcing them through different parts of the TV show structure. They escaped into what Rick called the meta layer. This was a dimension where wordplay became reality. Where the tools of storytelling were physical objects, Rick found meta-goggles that showed the narrative purpose of items in his garage. There was a Deus Ex Machina device, Chekhov's gun, an action enhancer, foreshadowing, gratuitous violence, a ticking clock. All storytelling concepts turned into real technology. Previous Leon prayed for help. Jesus Christ appeared. This was the same Jesus from the Story Train episode. Christopher Maloney voiced him again. Jesus beat Rick and Morty up. He used wrestling moves and broke Rick's back like Bane breaking Batman. Rick complained that Jesus beating them up was already done in South Park. While Jesus was fighting them, the Mastermind appeared. Storylord was back. Paul Giamatti returned to voice him. Storylord explained he spent a long time trapped in the Christian children's show that Rick stuck him in at the end of Never Ricking Morty. He used the power of faith to escape. He made it from the fictional Story Train toy into the real world of the actual show, and now he wanted revenge. Storylord stole the remote Rick used to navigate the meta layer. He trapped Rick and Morty there. Previous Leon bit Jesus and sent him into his own. Previously on loop, Jesus' previous life played out. He met Mary Magdalene, got crucified, rose on the third day, then realized he was immortal. He refused to work with Napoleon. He fought the Loch Ness Monster. He killed Dracula. He became a tech billionaire. He tried to resurrect Mary with his fortune, but failed. He asked a witch to drain his powers. He died of old age, in a hospital bed with a nurse named Mary. Previous Leon's power drained Jesus dry. His entire life force was consumed by the endless recap of his history. Rick and Morty were trapped in the frozen meta layer. They wandered until Joseph Campbell rescued them. Campbell was the scholar who wrote about the hero's journey that Dan Harmon's Story Circle was based on. Dan Harmon himself voiced Campbell in the episode. Campbell said he could not be retconned out of existence because every story needs an old man with soup. This was a lie, but it worked anyway. He was a living storytelling trope that Storylord could not erase. Campbell helped Rick and Morty devise a plan. Previous Leon bit Rick to give him the tools to escape. Rick went through a montage. He found out Leon betrayed him. Campbell showed him where to gather narrative ores. Rick and Morty got old, building a new machine. Morty got pregnant. Rick discovered Leon did not actually betray him. The montage was using narrative shortcuts to compress time. They built a device and returned to reality. Storylord had found his creator. He tracked down the actual writer who created him. The writer was working at a toy factory called Citadel Toys. This was the company that made the Story Train toy. Storylord wanted motivation. He had built a giant machine to steal motivation from everyone in the universe. The machine looked like a cosmic tuning fork from DC Comics' Crisis Events. It was powered by people with meta-awareness. Storylord's plan was to drain motivation from everyone so he could finally have purpose. When he scanned himself, he discovered his motivation was finding motivation. It was a circular, lazy twist. He was motivated by the search for motivation itself. Rick and Morty assembled a team. Previous Leon helped them. They met the self-referential Six. This was a team of meta-villains whose powers were based on storytelling concepts. Brett Kahn could retcon things. He could make something have always been true. He said you always were able to be killed with coffee, or you were born without bones. His power was rewriting continuity. Flashback could force flashbacks and gather information from them. He made Rick flashback to when he created the anti-meta field so flashback could learn how it worked. Continuity error could create continuity errors. She made a cup of coffee appear that had not been there before. Mr. Twist could force sudden plot twists with flash grenades that cut to the next scene. Protagonist could make any character the protagonist. There was another member whose power was unclear. These villains all weaponized narrative structure. Rick fought through them. He understood they were using storytelling devices as powers, so he used the same thing against them. He had tools from the meta layer, devices based on story concepts. Canon was now a battleground. Rick could route around narrative by understanding the rules. He could fight story structure with story structure. He reached Story Lord at the factory. The ghost of Joseph Campbell appeared. He said the writer must kill his own creation. The writer used a Rick plushie to strangle Story Lord. The plushie was being sold at a fake website, rick-plush.biz. This was a reference to the story-train.com joke from Never Ricking Morty. Rick burned the motivation drainer. Everything returned to normal. Except the writer got inspired and started working on the worst movie idea ever. The episode was even more meta than Never Ricking Morty. It was about the relationship between creators and their creations. Story Lord represented a character that gained sentience and resented his creator for making him. He wanted to steal the writer's motivation because he had none of his own. The writer had created him without purpose. Just as a villain for a toy commercial, Story Lord's entire existence was meaningless. He was a product of capitalism and merchandising, and he wanted to hurt his creator for giving him this empty life. The show was commenting on its own status as a product. Rick and Morty exists to make money. It has toys and merchandise. The story train was a real toy you could theoretically buy. The show was critiquing itself for being commercial. Both episodes made narrative structure into an enemy. Story Lord was the personification of storytelling conventions. He was powered by concepts like narrative energy and story potential and marketability. He represented all the pressures on showrunners to keep making content. Dan Harmon signed a 70-episode deal. He had to keep producing Rick and Morty for years. The episodes were about the anxiety of that burden. How do you keep making stories when you are trapped in an endless cycle? The story train, going in circles forever, was a metaphor for serialized television. You have to keep generating episodes. Keep hitting story beats. Keep the audience engaged. The train could never stop. Rick fought back against this by hacking the system. He understood he was in a story. He knew the structure. Dan Harmon's story circle, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the 8 steps, the thresholds, the prices. Rick could read the map and predict what came next. He weaponized his meta-knowledge. When trapped in fiction, he broke fiction's rules. He introduced elements that made no sense. Christian cartoons showing up randomly. It was bad storytelling on purpose, but it worked because it violated the narrative's internal logic. You defeat story structure by refusing to follow structure. You beat canon by breaking canon. Previously On's power was trapping people in their own history. In Previously On segments, the past became a weapon. Continuity was something that could hurt you. Jesus got destroyed by his own backstory. All his centuries of history played out and drained him. Canon killed him. Rick had to avoid the same fate. He could not let his past trap him. He had to keep moving forward, never getting stuck in one story or one structure. The self-referential 6 were villains who could manipulate the rules of storytelling, retconning, flashbacks, continuity errors, plot twists, making anyone the protagonist. These were weapons. The show was saying that narrative tools are not neutral, they can be used against you. Canon and continuity and story structure are things that can trap characters. Rick's response was to become aware of the tools and use them himself. Fight meta with meta, battle narrative with narrative. The meta layer was a place where this was literal, where story concepts were physical technology, where Chekhov's gun was an actual object you could pick up. Foreshadowing was a tool. Action enhancement was a device. Rick could use these things because he understood what they were. The episodes were deeply self-referential. They commented on Dan Harmon's writing process. They made fun of story structure. They acknowledged the show's commercial nature. They teased fans about wanting epic storylines with evil Morty. The scene of Rick and Morty facing the army was shown, but then dismissed. It was not real. It was just story potential that Story Lord extracted. The show was saying we could do that epic finale, but we are choosing not to. We are going to keep it episodic instead. We are going to avoid long-term serialization. Rick literally complained about Season 1 callbacks. He said he was sick of people wanting classic adventures like early seasons. The show was arguing with its own fanbase through Rick. The meta-layer radioactivity was measured in Space Jam cameos. This was because Rick and Morty appeared in Space Jam: A New Legacy in 2021. Rick said every second in the meta-layer equals 10 Space Jam cameos. The show was making fun of itself for doing a corporate cameo in a mediocre movie sequel. Joseph Campbell called Rick and Morty Back to the Future ripoffs. The show acknowledged its origins. Rick is inspired by Doc Brown. Morty is inspired by Marty McFly. Rick and Morty knows it is derivative, and it makes jokes about that fact. Storylord wanted to break the fifth wall. He wanted to escape from fiction into reality, to exist beyond the show. This was impossible. He was a fictional character. He could not become real. But he tried anyway. He got further than most. He made it from a toy into the actual show. From the story train to full meta Jack Rick. He crossed levels of reality, but he still could not escape. He was still trapped, still fictional, still powerless. The writer killed him with a plush toy. The show was saying, characters cannot defeat their creators. Fiction cannot overpower reality. No matter how self-aware Storylord became, he was still just a cartoon. Rick was different. Rick could hack canon because Rick was the protagonist. He had plot armor. He had narrative protection. The show needed him to survive, so he could do things Storylord could not. He could break the fourth wall safely. He could acknowledge the show's structure without consequences. He could weaponize storytelling because he was the main character. Morty tried to follow, but struggled. Morty said he did not like how meta things were getting. He was uncomfortable with the self-awareness. Rick had no such limits. Rick embraced it. Rick understood that knowing you are in a story gives you power over the story. You can't escape fiction, but you can manipulate it from inside. These episodes were unique in television. Most shows break the fourth wall occasionally. Rick and Morty made it the entire premise for 2 episodes. They turned meta-commentary into plot. They made narrative structure into a literal enemy. They gave Rick tools that were based on writing concepts. They showed that canon itself could be a battleground, that continuity could be weaponized. That story structure was not just a technique, but a force Rick could fight against. The show tested how far it could push meta-awareness before it stopped being entertaining and just became exhausting. Some viewers loved it. Others found it too self-indulgent, too much inside baseball, too focused on writers' room concerns rather than characters. But it was undeniably ambitious. Only Rick and Morty would make 2 episodes entirely about fighting the concept of storytelling itself. If you enjoyed our video, subscribe to our channel.